Chapter 171. She pursed her lips and sternly said, "Your Highness is not often in the capital, so you might not know. I remember when I was 7 or 8 years old, there was indeed a popular vaudeville troupe in the capital that raised wolf demons, dog demons, and even bear demons. It attracted a lot of people. At that time, I was curious and asked my mother to take me to see it. But at that time, I felt that it was devoid of spirituality and forced animals to learn human things for people's entertainment. So, I didn't go see it again. After about half a year, that vaudeville troupe probably made enough money in the capital and went somewhere else, so I never heard of it again. At that time, I was young and didn't think too deeply about it. Now that I think about it, those monsters and bear demons were really strange. No matter how skilled the vaudeville troupe was, animals were animals after all. After being whipped countless times, they could be trained to do the corresponding actions when they heard keywords. But learning to write was really too strange. I felt that there might be a problem here, so I asked Chun Niang to help me ask around. Other than that, I can't say for sure, but I found a similarity. Ning Shu slowly drew 3 circles on the small table and then drew a line between them to connect them. Did Your Highness find it? Whether it was the Imperial Astronomer, Wei Yang Palace, or Wenfang Palace, the method of committing the crime was surprisingly similar. Xiahou Qing took over and slowly said, they were all under the watchful eyes of everyone, and they all had each other's companions as witnesses. But in one place, the signature was swapped. In another place, the concubine selection was made into a ghost under our eyes. In another place, a living person disappeared without a trace. That's right, Ning Shu nodded, just like every lock has a key. The concubine selection key was the dead Shenxing, so the other 2 locks must also have the key to unlock them. As for the key to the curse of the 8 characters, I suspect that there was a problem with one of the 8 eunuchs that Imperial concubine Qi sent. And Qi Juanyu was kidnapped, so the key is very likely to be with the wolf demon that she killed and came back to take her life after 9 years. She and Xiahou Qing had discussed the matter of the Imperial Astronomer before. It was really too difficult for someone in the Imperial Astronomer to succeed, because every later step could be discovered. Furthermore, she had carefully examined that piece of paper before she went to the banquet, and there were no traces of magic. Therefore, only those 8 people had the opportunity to commit the crime. Moreover, on the night the lot was taken and sent to the palace, it was raining heavily. The lights were all extinguished, giving that person an opportunity to take advantage of .o. As for whether he was a true confidant or a fake confidant, don't forget that a person's heart was separated by their bellies. Ning Shu said, those 8 eunuchs are all Imperial concubine Qi's trusted aides. I am unable to appear personally, so I can only ask Your Highness to send someone to investigate. As for Shenxing, although she is dead, the matter is not over. You want to investigate the death of Wen Siren 6 years ago? Xiahou Qing's hand, which was habitually twisting the bones in his palm, suddenly stopped. Ning Shu nodded slowly. Yes. Xiahou Qing lightly sneered between his teeth. Secret matters deep in the palace, Imperial concubines secretly fighting, behind the scenes represents an unfathomable power struggle. The person has already been dead for so many years, and you want to bring up this old debt. Your courage is not small. Ning Shu was not the least bit afraid. She beamed and said, don't I have Your Highness to support me? When she was flattering others, Ning Shu's voice was especially obedient, just like the most famous honey milk soup in the Chasing Cloud Chasing Moon restaurant. The beef cheese that was brewed perfectly was brushed with a thin layer of fresh and sweet honey. Then, a circle of ice was poured over it and hurriedly delivered to the guests' tables. Spoonful by spoonful, it was cool and sweet. Since the age of 17, Xiahou Qing had lost his sense of taste. Fortunately, he didn't care much about eating, and these years, he didn't have too many regrets. Only recently, he suddenly remembered the sweetness he had tasted in the past 10 years. Chapter 172. With 2 dark circles under his eyes, Huaymor gently knocked on the small door of the west corner of Duke Ning's house. Forsythia, who had been guarding there, heard the noise. She opened the door and greeted Huaymor. Then she went in to report to Ning Shu. Soon, Ning Shu, who had changed into a short coat, came out of the house. She got on the other horse that Huemore brought along. The two horses, one black and one red, were both good horses. They stepped on their hooves and flew steadily and briskly into the moonlight that shrouded the top of their heads. They blended into the bottomless night of the imperial city. Lady Ning, I've investigated the corpse of the poisonous bee you gave me before. It's called the ghost bee. Its stinger is very poisonous. If you are stung by it, the venom will flow into your blood and into your heart. If you don't get treatment, you will die in a few days. And its symptoms are very similar to coughing up blood during the epidemic, so it's easy to ignore. While riding the horse, Huemore quickly shared with her the result of staying up late these 2 days. He was very tired, but his eyes were shining. This kind of poisonous bee can only be found in Nanjiang. It can only breed in the humid and hot environment there. We don't have it in the Central Plains. Ning Shu listened quietly. The moon was bright tonight, but her eyes were not inferior to the moon. Instead, they were more clear and bright. So it means that, first, this kind of poisonous bee can't be touched by ordinary people. Second, 13th Princess didn't lie to me. Wen Siren's death was not caused by the epidemic or an accident. It was a deliberate murder. Third, Shenxing really wanted to avenge his close friend. Huemore followed her thoughts and thought for a long time. Then he put forward a vague speculation. The information about the poisonous bee and Wen Siren's death were both given by 13th Princess. Is it possible that she also participated in it to avenge her mother? Ning Shu said, without conclusive evidence, we can't determine who is the suspect out of thin air. Anyway, let's check the corpse first and see if we can find any useful clues. In the moonlight, she bent over and rode the horse. She held the reins in her hands tightly. The horse galloped in the direction of the Imperial Mausoleum. 20 miles away from the Imperial Mausoleum, they ran into the guards of the first inspection. Ning Shu took out a copper pass from her bosom and rode her horse past the checkpoint. In order to find clues from the dead, an autopsy was necessary. Ever since she mentioned it to Xiahou Qing, in less than 24 hours, she received permission to explore filing with Huemore at night. It didn't take long for them to reach the second checkpoint. Before they reached the third checkpoint, Ning Shu and Huemore pulled the reins and turned the horses to the left. According to the Imperial Academy of Medicine's report, Wen Siren had died of an epidemic. Under such circumstances, it was not suitable to be buried in the Imperial Mausoleum. Otherwise, it would ruin the Imperial family's true dragon qi. Thus, a separate area was set up 5 li northwest of the Imperial Mausoleum and she was hastily buried. Buried with her, there were many abandoned concubines who had died of madness, exhaustion, and loneliness in the cold palace. As for the mausoleum keeper, there was actually one arranged. It was an old eunuch with grizzled hair, blurred eyes, and deaf ears. As soon as the sky turned dark, he began to feel drowsy. If it weren't for the fact that he could still breathe, people would have thought that he was one of the old zombies of this mausoleum. As for guarding against tomb robbers, don't make a fool of yourself. Which concubine buried here could get a generous burial gift before they died? To be able to be changed into a neat palace dress, they already had to thank His Majesty. The people of the Southern Pacifying Lord's Mansion were peerless people. The horses of the Southern Pacifying Lord's Mansion were also extraordinary horses. They had already covered more than 10 li in less than 2 hours. Nay, with a soft cry, the horse slowly slowed down its 4 hooves. At this time, the moon was slanting to the west at a moderate angle. The nights of the 4th month were no longer cold, but Ning Shu still felt desolate for no reason as she stood in front of the silent mausoleum. It was as if there were countless young, old, sad, and resentful women's sighs coming from all directions. The bright moon above her head was also immersed in the icy water. Chapter 173. Once Huemore entered, he couldn't help but shudder. His entire body felt cold. This place feels so eerie. Seeing him shrink his shoulders and tighten his grip on the reins, Ning Shu couldn't help but laugh. Haven't you dealt with hundreds of corpses and cut open many of them with your own hands? Why are you still scared? It's different. Huemore couldn't explain it himself. He just scratched his head and said, I keep feeling that there's a lot of resentment here. It's like someone is crying beside my ear. To be honest, Ning Shu also felt that the imperial mausoleum was too shabby compared to the imperial mausoleum that was 5 li away. However, she didn't want to say it out loud to increase Hui Mo's fear. It could only be said that compared to the countless palace maids who died unjustly in the palace, this place was much better. At least they had a place to rest after death. Ning Shu said, "The death of a person is like the extinguishing of a lamp. All gratitude and enmity are gone. Resentment and grief are mostly the conjectures and experiences of us living people. Don't think too much and start working." Hui Mo nodded. He jumped off the horse and took off his tool bag. "I'm going to work. Madam Wen." Just like her appearance that the emperor despised for being too plain, her name was also ordinary. Wen Yiji. Her family background was even worse. She was just a 6th or 7th rank general. The greatest contribution her father had made was probably 38 years ago when Zhao Wenzhong of Jingju plotted a rebellion. At that time, as the 4th prince, Jin Sheng was ordered by the late emperor to quell the rebellion. He was almost surrounded by a series of plots. The late old prince Yu led an army to save Jin Sheng. However, he was separated from old Princess Yu in the chaos. When Yiji's father found the missing old Princess Yu by chance and escorted her back to the city. Old Prince Yu was very grateful and was promoted from a 7th rank general to a 6th rank general. However, before his bright future could continue for long, an infection caused him to die. Only his widowed wife and young daughter were left to suffer in the world. This branch of the Wen family had no children, so it could be said that the family line was cut off. Each and every one of the clan members stared at this pair of weak mother and daughter like hungry wolves, wanting to seize this branch's property. Madam Wen's mother was angered to death. A few years later, Madam Wen was sent to the palace to serve the royal family, accumulating virtue and enjoying a good life. This was also one of the reasons why old Princess Consort Yu chose to raise the 13th princess after old Prince Yu passed away a few years ago. It could be said that she was repaying the kindness of the past. Ning Shu helped Hui Mo to light up a few candles around the coffin. The two of them put on silk gloves and covered their faces with a handkerchief soaked in vinegar and garlic paste. They started to dig into the ground to open the coffin. In this aspect, Hui Mo was experienced and his speed was very fast. Ning Shu had always been calm in front of charred corpses and rotting corpses. After half an hour, they dug out a large pile of soil, revealing a complete cypress coffin. "This talented lady, this little one came to disturb you because of your grievance. Please don't blame me. I have offended you." Hui Mo put his hands together and muttered a few words. He bowed again and changed to another set of tools to prepare the coffin. When he was about to insert the dagger into the crack, his wrist was suddenly held down by Ning Shu. "Wait. This coffin has been opened before." Under the moonlight, Ning Shu's eyes were very sharp. "Ah!" Hui Mo was stunned for a moment and hurriedly took a lamp from the side to take a closer look. He suddenly exclaimed, "It's true." He hastily jumped into the pit and walked around the coffin with the lamp in his hand. He said, "These nails have traces of being opened and then nailed back in place. The top and bottom of the coffin also have some wear and tear. For example, there are 2 small pieces of tung oil paint here. My God, people have died so miserably. Who is so wicked to dig up people's graves?" Chapter 174. The corner of Ning Shu's mouth twitched. She raised her head and looked at him silently. After he finished talking, Hui Mo realized that he was also scolding himself. He hurriedly added, "I'm not talking about us, I mean other than us. Let me see, from the light rust left by the second corrosion, it doesn't seem to be too old. It should be within a year or so. This shows that our suspicions should be correct." Ning Shu also rolled up her sleeves, revealing a small section of her snow-white wrist. She jumped into the pit and looked around the coffin. "The other party is very cautious. I can't find any clues outside the coffin. Let's lift the coffin and take a look." The 7 suppressing nails were removed one by one. Under the hazy moonlight, the heavy coffin lid was lifted. That literary talent who had swallowed a bellyful of tears finally reappeared in this world. The thick stench of corpses mixed with the smell of tulip juice. The smell was unparalleled. Even though there was a thick handkerchief between them, Hui Mo and Ning Shu almost fell over from the smell. They both turned their faces away at the same time. TSK, this is troublesome. When the smell dissipated, Hui Mo put half of his head into the coffin. He swept his eyes up and down and showed an embarrassed expression. It was common knowledge that the older a corpse was, the harder it was to examine it. Even if there were simple anti-corrosion measures, after 6 years, the corpse had already changed beyond recognition. Only the shape of the flesh and bones stuck to the palace dress could be vaguely seen. It was a slender woman about 6 feet tall. As for the rest, it was really a headache. Ning Shu said, "We can check the poison." Hui Mo nodded, "It seems that we can't do anything else." He quickly took out a bag of silver needles and began to work. Next to him, Ning Shu didn't disturb him. She just held an oil lamp. In the flickering flame gently blown by the breeze, she quietly looked at the talented scholar who was born inconspicuous and died inconspicuously. No matter how ordinary a family was, after their loved ones passed away, they would gather a few cups and pots to be buried with them. However, Wen Siren's tomb was very clean. Other than the rotten flesh and rotten palace robes, there was nothing else inside. Ning Shu looked carefully for a long time before she dug out a dark grey and heavy object from the slight protrusion of the palace robes on her chest. In Ning Bai's eyes, the strange thing in her hand clearly reflected. Ning Shu blinked and vaguely recognized it. "This is a name lock?" The colorful thread tied to it had long been rotten and would break at a touch. Only the rusty body of the lock still maintained the shape of a bat, which meant Fu. A name lock, also known as a longevity lock. Almost every baby's family would put one on him or her after they were born. Rich families would carefully make one with gold, jade, and jewelry. Ordinary families would choose the cheaper silver and the lowest grade would be copper. But no matter what kind of material it was made of, it would be engraved with the words long life and wealth, which represented thousands of parents' hope for their children to grow up safely. The one in Ning Shu's hand was made of medium silver. There were 3 delicate bells at the bottom, which could make a crisp bell sound when it was shaken slightly. Hui Mo heard the bell sound and looked over. He curiously said, "She died an unnatural death at a young age, but she was buried with a longevity lock that represented longevity and wealth. This is so creative." It was not only creative, but also inexplicably ironic. What did the person who chose the burial objects for her think? If it was intentional, it was really vicious. He thought for a while and said, "Could it be that the talented scholar made this for the 13th princess when she was born?" Before the talented scholar died, he was reluctant to part with his beloved daughter, so he asked the 13th princess to take the longevity lock that the 13th princess wore when she was young to be buried with him. It makes sense. It shouldn't be. Ning Shu slowly shook her head. Judging from the blackened appearance of the silver lock, it may be 20 or 30 years old. Judging from the time, maybe the talented scholar was just born at that time. Chapter 175. Ning Shu couldn't figure out the longevity lock for the time being, so she took out a handkerchief and wrapped it up. She was going to take it back and study it carefully. On the other side, Hui Mo finished examining the front side of the corpse. With the help of Ning Shu, he carefully turned the corpse sideways and continued to stab with the silver needle. It didn't take long for him to find a rotten part of the heart. The silver needle immediately turned black as soon as it pierced into the heart. Hui Mo's face became serious. He hurriedly changed a knife and carefully cut out a small piece of rotten flesh from one of the places. After half an hour, he found the result. She was indeed killed by the poison of the ghost head bee. The place where the ghost head bee stung her was the back of her heart. The wound caused by the ghost head bee was very small. It was almost the size of a needle. If there was only one wound, it was reasonable that the Imperial Hospital couldn't find it at that time. However, Hui Mo and Ning Shu found no less than 8 rotten places on the back of Wen Siren's body. Even a blind person could feel that there was something wrong with her death. The Imperial Hospital could lie through their teeth and say that she was killed by the epidemic. They were simply shameless. Ning Shu and Hui Mo didn't say anything for a while. They just silently turned her body over and carefully flipped it back. Soaked in tulip juice, the corpse was very slippery, coupled with the rotten flesh. Hui Mo was not careful and did not hold the corpse firmly, causing it to fall. He hurriedly apologized in a low voice, only to find that when the corpse was shaking, a round thing suddenly rolled out of its mouth and rolled to the edge of the coffin. Ning Shu reached out her hand to take it, but Hui Mo stopped her. "Let me." Hui Mo pinched the black bead between his fingers and frowned. "This is," after a long while, he dared to show an astonished expression and said in unison with Ning Shu, "Soul-calming bead?" They checked the poison and took the longevity lock. Originally, they didn't intend to destroy the corpse. They didn't expect to find this thing by accident. This kind of soul-suppressing orb was usually used on the 3 types of deceased people to prevent them from coming back to life. The first type was soldiers who had killed people on the battlefield. The more people they killed, the heavier the bloodthirsty aura on them, and the easier it was for them to come back and cause chaos in the human world. The second type was people who were full of resentment before they died. Their eyes could not close before they died, indicating that they would definitely come back for revenge. The third type was pregnant women who died. Before the babies in their wombs could come to the human world, they were forced to go back to hell. Their resentment was very strong, and it was very easy for them to riot. Wend Siren obviously did not belong to the first category. As for the second possibility, according to Xiao Zhangping's own words, before Wend Siren died, he persuaded her not to investigate the cause of her death. He only wanted Xiao Zhongping to live on peacefully and peacefully. Therefore, the resentment theory didn't hold water. If that was the case, it could only mean, "I'll have to trouble you to help me check if she." Ning Shu turned her face away and took a deep breath. This was the first time she felt that it was so difficult to ask a question. Was she pregnant before she died? Hui Mo's lips trembled slightly. He clenched the knife in his hand. After a while, he nodded solemnly and stretched out the silver knife to the lower abdomen of the corpse. Then, he broke out in a cold sweat and couldn't bear to look at it. He had cut open the head of an imperial censor who died by suicide. He had also cut open the body of a woman who committed suicide by jumping into the river. Not to mention the piles of people who died of starvation, illness, old age, and poison. Hui Mo was very confident in himself before. He thought that there was nothing in the world that he couldn't check. But now, he couldn't help but tremble when he saw the small bones carefully picked out from the rotten belly of Wend Siren. What was this? This was the skeleton of an infant that had yet to take shape, and even more so, it was a young creature that had almost come to the human world. However, there was someone who forcefully blocked his path to the human world, and he didn't even have the chance to cry out in grievance. Hui Mo's eyes were red and swollen. He clenched his teeth tightly. A pair of hands raised and reached over to cover his eyes. It was Ning Shu. "Don't look. You go out first." Hui Mo thanked her gratefully. He wiped his tears and jumped out of the grave pit. He squatted not far away and silently calmed down. In the grave pit, in front of the coffin, Ning Shu's slender figure stood straight. Her eyes quietly fell on the small bones that were smaller than toothpicks. It seemed that it was only 3 or 4 months old. It was just a lump of flesh and blood that had just turned into a human shape. So far, the outline of the cause of Wend Siren's death can be roughly described. After restoring Wend Siren's body as much as possible, they closed the coffin and covered the grave. Ning Shu and Hui Mo went back to Nanping Prince's mansion without stopping with the clues they had collected after a whole night of work. The moon was dim and the sky was about to be bright. The lights in Nanping Prince's mansion were still lit. It seemed that they had been waiting for her all night. Chapter 176. This was an extremely cruel murder. She gently closed the yellowed file in her hand. Ning Shu's movements were very careful, so she didn't tear the thin pages. She could barely feel the weight of the booklet in her hand. It was a simple record of the unremarkable life of the talented scholar. Walking out of the archives of the Imperial Household Department, which was as deep as a forest, Ning Shu solemnly thanked the old eunuch who had opened the back door for her. Then, she rubbed her numb legs while whispering to Xiaoho Qing. As for why Xiaoho Qing was here. Wasn't the face of Duke Nanping's crown prince the best pass? She supported Xiahou Qing all the way out of the dark and gloomy warehouse. They walked past the wall inlaid with 2 dragons playing with pearls, and then crossed the high threshold of the Imperial Household Department. Ning Shu helped Xiahou Qing into the carriage. 6 years ago, when Siren was lucky enough to be pregnant with a dragon fetus again. This attracted the jealousy of a certain power in the harem, so they ruthlessly attacked her and poisoned her with the ghost head bee. Then, they threatened her with the 13th princess's life, forcing her not to say anything. When Siren, who was alone and helpless, could only watch helplessly as she walked down the road to death. Before she died, she told the 13th princess not to investigate in order to save her daughter's life. Other people might not be able to conceive a dragon fetus in their lifetime, but when Siren was really favored by the heavens. She had only been favored twice in her life. The first time, she was pregnant with the 13th princess, and the second time, she was pregnant. Moreover, it was very likely that she was pregnant with a boy this time. Treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. Ning Shu couldn't help but sigh. If she had a decent family background, or if she had a little bit of love from His Majesty, she wouldn't have been forced to walk down such a miserable path. Unfortunately, she didn't have anything. She only had her shoulders that were full of holes, and her daughter who was as weak as a flower branch that could be snapped with a pinch. If a woman's good luck was not matched by her ability to protect herself, then no matter how good her luck was, it would only bring endless disasters. Thus, the dragon's son that others begged for but couldn't get became a knife that she handed to others to kill herself. Judging from the direction of this case, I suspect that concubine Qi was the one who killed Wen Cai. As Ning Shu spoke, she naturally helped Xiahou Qing to sit properly in the carriage. She then took a brocade cushion and placed it next to him to prevent him from being knocked over by the bumpy carriage. After doing all this, she was puzzled. Why was she becoming more and more adept at doing these things? She really did seem like a little eunuch who served Prince Nanping. Ning Shu silently slapped her own meddlesome paws and was speechless at herself. Servility was something that could not be tolerated. His sharp hearing seemed to have caught Ning Shu's private movements. Xiahou Qing's throat moved, and a faint gentleness appeared on his lips. However, the arc was too shallow, and before Ning Shu could notice it, it had already dissipated. This possibility is very high, he said. The carriage moved out steadily. Amidst the clattering of the hooves and the rolling of the wheels, Xiahou Qing methodically picked out the gold from the sand. Now, I will list out the newly discovered problems. First, when Siren's parents died early, and her closest friends were only the palace maids and eunuchs who worked with her in the past. Then, who was the leader of her revenge? 6 years ago, they didn't reach out to save her. Why did they work so hard 6 years later? Ning Shu followed closely. Second, who was the person who dug the grave before us? From the signs of the coffin lid overlapping, the movements were very careful and didn't seem like the work of a grave robber. In addition, there were no traces of being touched on the corpse. Why did that person dig the grave and open the coffin? It can't be that they just looked. Xiahou Qingfu continued. Third, what's with that longevity lock? Chapter 177. She used silver washing water to wipe the black and grey rust spots on the longevity lock. Only then was she able to vaguely distinguish the shape of each engraving. Ning Shu took the lock out of her sleeve and let it slip in with the breeze from the carriage curtain, making a crisp and melodious sound. Is there a possibility that the other party opened the coffin to put in this longevity lock? The sandcastle in Ning Shu's mind was constantly being pushed down and rebuilt, but her parents died early. Who would come here inexplicably, open the coffin of an unfavored concubine who had been dead for many years, and put in a longevity lock made decades ago? Could it be that there is a close elder in her family who is in a high position? We'll have to look into it again. Xiahou Qing didn't disturb her thoughts. After she finished muttering, he asked, "What are you going to do with this lock?" "I'm going to ask a silversmith," Ning Shu said. Her clear eyes blinked, and then her lips curved up. She opened the curtain and threw the lock to Huemore outside. "Thank you, Huemore." Huemore suddenly whined, "Lady Ning, please forgive me. There are at least hundreds of silversmiths in the capital. Do you want me to ask them one by one? It's been so long. Even the maker may have forgotten that he made such a thing. Ning Shu leisurely shook her head. No, no. The most complicated part of a longevity lock is the bell. It's not difficult for ordinary silversmiths to make it, but it's not easy to make it delicate enough. But the one that when CAI found in the heart can still make a crisp sound after so many years. The shape is perfectly round, and there are complicated hollow patterns carved on it. It's enough to show the craftsmanship of the craftsman. The government has always been strict in the field of silversmithing. Most of them are passed down from father to son. I heard that every brilliant craftsman will make a unique mark on his work to prevent others from making fake ones. So, you can ask them according to the ranking of the famous silversmiths in the capital. It should greatly shorten the time. Hearing this, Huemore was still a little reluctant. Lady Ning's mouth was a coaxing ghost. When had she not ordered him around? He did not believe that this matter was as simple and quick as she made it out to be. Ning Shu saw him mumbling and said, "Forsythia will go with you." Huemore thinks for a while and says reluctantly, "Okay." Then he sighs. Forsythia, so be it. She was a girl after all, and her looks were, all right. She was still better than those coarse old men in the prince's residence. After deciding on the procedures for the investigation, Ning Shu returned to the duke's residence to catch up on some sleep. She would continue with the investigation once her mind was clear. However, after changing into her pajamas, she tossed and turned for a while and suddenly couldn't fall asleep. Because before she got down from Xiahou Qing's carriage, she suddenly remembered that concubine Qi had specially visited her Duke Ning the day before yesterday and gave her a warning outside the residence. She couldn't help but sigh. Concubine Qi had specially told me not only to take over this case, but also to do it well for her. If she knew that in the end, this case was traced back to her, my poor head ah. What are you afraid of? Xiahou Qing said lightly. Huh. Ning Shu looked at him in confusion. He casually moved his body and leaned against the brocade cushion she had placed beside him. His jade-colored slender fingers twirled the bone in his palm out of habit as he lifted his chin slightly towards her. With me here, no one in this world has the ability to take your life. He added, even if you, Ning Shu, die, you can only be buried with me in the future. Chapter 178. At that time, the sky was vast and the clouds were thin. The crisp sound of horse hooves pulling the carriage behind them leisurely passed the Great Xianghua Temple. 2 years ago, the Great Xianghua Temple introduced a kind of flower tree called Japanese cherry blossoms from Wo Nation. This year was the first year it bloomed. The pink snow cherry blossoms were really delicate and fresh, attracting many people in the capital to see it. As a result, the horse hooves gradually weakened, and the carriage Ning Shu and Xiahou Qing were in was blocked here. The people who had enjoyed the cherry blossoms walked out of the Xianghua Temple, still unsatisfied. As they walked, they exclaimed, "I really didn't expect that a flower tree sent from Wo Nation thousands of miles away would bloom so well in our great Yu state. That drooping flower stem, pink and white petals, and tender red stamens, it's like a delicate beauty. It's really beautiful." In the carriage, listening to the admiration of the people outside the carriage, Ning Shu's clear green eyes clearly reflected Xiahou Qing's slightly raised chin and his light pink lips at this time. In a trance, she sighed like a flower lover. She really didn't expect it. Just like in that life, they hadn't even seen each other once. No one expected that there would be such an opportunity. Meeting, forming an alliance, solving cases side by side, and slowly forming such a deep bond. Silently, Ning Shu secretly took a deep breath. She remembered that more than half a month ago, when investigating the cloud leaf case, she had asked, "Your Highness, if in the end I still can't find the secret of the plum blossom kiss, will you really let me be buried with you?" He answered, "No. After death, I can only accept lying with another person unless that person is very close to me. You. The black tortoise outside my grave is still lacking a person." But now he changed his words. In total, it was no more than 30 to 50 words. After repeating it several times in her mind, she said, "It seems that Your Highness said before, you don't need me to be buried with you." When Xiahou Qing heard her words, he couldn't help but feel a little reluctant. Xiahou Qing frowned and said, When the first emperor passed away, 8,000 terracotta soldiers were buried with him. What? After I, Xiahou Qing, am dead, I can't accompany you, Ningxu? Or do you want to go back on your oath? Ningxu was silent for a moment. Your Highness is peerless. Don't talk about me, even if you accompany 10 people, it's still not enough. Back then, my daughter had personally made an oath. Naturally, she remembered it. Ha ha. Outside the window came the sound of 5-year-old Jia playing with the maidservants. She was like a bird that had just left its nest, tender and happy. Ningxu's lips curled into a smile amidst the laughter that was as pure as fresh snow. She slowly calmed down and no longer thought about anything else, falling asleep in a daze. 3 hours later, Ningxu was awakened. Zigui walked to Ningxu's bed with a serious expression. He looked at the young miss who was still in a deep sleep and hesitated for a moment before finally deciding to wake her up. Young miss, the missing Qi Jueyu has been found. His voice was very soft, but it made Ningxu suddenly open her eyes. A handful of cold water quickly woke her up. Ningxu quickly washed and changed her clothes while asking Zigui about the details of what had happened. Zigui said, to be exact, she wasn't found. She was accidentally found. After 4th Miss Qi went missing, everyone in the Marquis Lu's residence was worried. Madame Qi washed her face with tears all day long and Lord Qi also sighed. Thus, they decided to give out porridge in the east and west of the city to accumulate good fortune. They hoped that God would see their sincerity and send Qi Jueyu back in one piece. However, Marquis Lu's residence gave out porridge for several days, but there was still no news of Qi Jueyu. Madame Qi said that perhaps their hearts weren't sincere enough. There were still many sick and disabled beggars in the capital who couldn't get their own porridge. It would be better for them to take the initiative to send it over so that the immortals would be touched. Most of the beggars lived under bridges in abandoned houses. Thus, the servants of the Qi family went to deliver the porridge. Then, they found a female beggar under a bridge. Her voice was very similar to 4th Miss Qi's. Upon closer inspection, it was indeed her. They turned pale with fright and hurriedly brought her back to their residence. Chapter 179. How is Qi Juanyu? Did she say what happened to her in the past few days when she disappeared? Ningxu asked. She can't say anything, Zigui replied. She can't recognize anyone and can't answer any questions. She has been screaming and screaming. As long as someone comes close, she will scratch and bite. Even her mother, Madame Qi, has been scratched by her. But she has been silently calling for Air Xiahou. She is no different from a lunatic. Zigui briefly summarized Qi Juanyu's terrible experience in a few words. Ningxu could not help but be speechless. And this news also spread throughout the capital at the fastest speed. For a time, every corner was talking about it in surprise. No one would have thought that the insufferably arrogant 4th Miss of the Qi family was really crazy, just like the curse on the signature. After fastening the last button, Ningxu did not wait for a moment and immediately rushed to Marquis Lu Bo's residence. Because of concubine Qi's verbal order to investigate the case, even if Marquis Lu Bo's residence did not welcome her, they still let her in with a cold face. Before she stepped into the courtyard where Qi Juanyu lived, she heard the shrill screams from afar and the chaotic persuasion of the servants. Qi Juanyu was dirty and smelly. Her whole body emitted a pungent stench as if she had just been dragged out of a livestock cage. Her hair was messy and her eyes were unfocused. Like a headless fly, she kept running in the courtyard with her head in her hands. She rolled and pushed away the servants who surrounded her one by one. The faces and bodies of the servants were full of scratches and bites from her. They were all bloody, but no one dared to come forward and forcibly restrain her. Because when she was forcibly brought back from under the bridge, Qi Juanyu struggled and kept hitting her forehead on the ground and the wall. She almost killed herself. Ah! My darling, how did it become like this? Master Tian, why don't you let me die first? Madame Qi leaned against the door and looked at her daughter who had lost her mind and was no different from a lunatic. She almost cried her heart out. Madame Qi cried until she was exhausted. Her vision blurred and she almost fell to the ground. Ning Shu walked quickly and supported her in time. Madam Qi, how are you? Let me help you to rest. She didn't know which word or phrase of Ning Shu had touched Qi Jueyu's fragile nerves. When she heard this, her entire body tensed up. Her eyes widened, and she crawled out of the cabinet like a puppet. Then, she knelt in front of Madam Qi and slammed her forehead on the ground. As she kowtowed, she said frightening auspicious words, "Old master, madam, young master, and young miss, are in good health and have a long life." Everyone gasped and involuntarily took a few steps back, as if they had seen a ghost. What was going on? The scene in front of them was even more frightening than being beheaded at the Meridian Gate. Qi Juanyu didn't notice it at all. She just continued to kowtow dully like a walking corpse. The flowers are good, the moon is round, melons are plentiful, and the family is happy, long life is safe. Every word that came out of her mouth made people's hearts jump. It was not until Mother Hui and others sobbed and rushed over to hold her while Qi Juanyu scratched her, and then Lord Qi strode over and slapped her on the back of the neck to make her faint that this shocking congratulatory speech came to an end for the time being. But Qi Juanyu, who was still twitching on the bed, clearly told everyone that this might just be the beginning. Chapter 180. Qi Zhouyu fainted and Madam Qi also fainted from excessive grief. The servants hurriedly helped Madam Qi back to her room while the servants hurriedly helped her wash up and change into clean clothes before Qi Zhouyu woke up. At least she didn't look like a beggar. However, no matter where they went, they all shouted in unison, "Doctor! Go and find the best doctor in the city. As for the Imperial Academy of Medicine, invite the most skilled Imperial physician Zhu and Imperial physician Liu over." The entire Marquis Lu Bo's residence was lifeless. Two maidservants quickly came out of the room with 2 black basins of dirty water. Then, they changed the basins and walked back. On the way back, they whispered, "Don't you think that 4th young miss looked a bit like an ugly entertainer in a sideshow stall to amuse people? The kind that kneels down and kowtows to ask for money during festivals?" One of the maids secretly nodded, "It's a bit like that." "Ah, doesn't that mean she's more like the wolf demon? Except that 4th miss can speak and the wolf demon can only write a few words with its claws, everything else is exactly the same. Could it be that the wolf demon has possessed 4th miss? Oh my god, are we going to suffer together with them? Amitabha, don't talk about it, it's too scary, my heart is beating fast. I only hope that every injustice has its perpetrator and every debt has its debtor, don't implicate innocent people like us." Inside the house, Mother Hui waited for a long time but the clean water still didn't come. She opened the window and frowned. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Miss is waiting for water here." The 2 young maidservants hurriedly shut their mouths and quickened their steps as they entered the room. Behind 2 jade-green banana trees, Ning Shu and Zi Gui listened to this small conversation in silence. It seemed that Qi Jueyu not only had a domineering reputation in the capital, but also in her own residence. Except for Mother Hui, the other maids and servants couldn't wait to stay away from this lousy matter so as not to be implicated. If she was not mistaken, one of the 2 maidservants they were talking about was Gui Jin, who had followed Qi Juanyu into the palace. How's the investigation of the maids who followed Qi Jueyu into the palace? Apart from Mother Hui, there are 5 other maids. The 4th young miss of the Qi family is a haughty and domineering person. She often beats and scolds the servants. In the past few days, I found out that the 5 servant girls have more or less been punished by her, especially Gui Jin. The rules of the Qi mansion forbade the maids and boys from being intimate with each other. As for Xiong Jin, she was childhood sweethearts with one of the night guards in the mansion. They grew up together and became intimate. When Qi Jueyu found out, he punished Xiong Jin severely and beat up the guard before driving him out of the mansion. Ning Shu nodded silently. No wonder Gui Jin took the initiative to tell her about the wolf demon that day and spread the news of Qi Zhouyu's brutality. After hearing this, Ning Shu continued to ask, "What about Mama Hui?" Mother Hui used to be a teaching nanny in the palace. She was released from the palace when she was 30 years old and had been invited by various noble families to teach the young ladies in their manners. 9 years ago, Qi Jueyu killed the wolf demon on the street and dragged its corpse through several streets, causing a lot of criticism. Lord Qi was so angry that he invited Mother Hui into the mansion to discipline her. However, Mother Hui is indeed powerful. Since she entered the mansion, Qi Jueyu has indeed restrained himself a lot. How is their relationship? Very good. Most of the time, Mother Hui's words are even more effective than Lady Qi's. After Qi Jueyu went missing, Mother Hui was also very worried and had been praying with Lady Qi. Ning Shu calculated in her heart. Mother Hui was released from the palace 20 years ago. At that time, when Cai had just entered the palace as a maid. The two of them brushed past each other and shouldn't have interacted with each other. Has the maid called Gui Jin left the mansion these days? Ning Shu thought for a while and asked again. Yes. Zi Gui nodded. She went out twice. Both times, she secretly went out from the Jiaomen in the evening to visit her childhood sweetheart and secretly came back at night. After Zi Gui finished speaking, he added, her childhood sweetheart was beaten up that day and became disabled. He can only lie on the bed and wait for people to serve him. He's like a cripple. Chapter 181. She's not poisoned, nor does she seem to have taken any drugs to confuse her mind. Instead, she seems to have been frightened by something so terrible that she can't control her mind now. Several of the most famous doctors in the capital came to the same conclusion after diagnosing Qi Jueyu. Lord Qi's eyes were bloodshot as he asked, "Is there any possibility of my daughter recovering?" The doctors said hesitantly, "It's hard to say. There have been many similar cases, but some people slowly get better after a few years. They regain their sanity and can live a normal life. There are also some people who don't. It depends on their luck." Qi Zhanyu seemed to be disturbed by their voices. She suddenly woke up, and her unfocused eyes glanced around. She immediately screamed and returned to her original cute state. Mother Hui and the others, who had just taken a breath, hurried forward to stop her from hurting herself. But the closer they got, the more frightened Qi Jueyu was. She fell from the bed and crawled under it. She screamed as she crawled, "Ah, ah, 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 don't cut my skin, don't cut my skin. Prince Xiaohou, come and save me, come and save me." Lord Qi said bitterly, "Last year, Huaijin died tragically for no reason. This year, the disaster is transferred to Jueyu. What did my Qi family do?" As the suspect who killed Qi Huaijin, Ning Shu quickly retracted her neck and quietly walked away from Qi Jueyu's window. When she stepped out of Qi Jueyu's courtyard, she seemed to be able to hear Qi Jueyu's creepy and incomprehensible scream, "Give me back my skin." Tan Siwei was already waiting at the door of the Supreme Court. Ning Shu immediately said as soon as she got off the horse, "Sorry to keep you waiting." For convenience, she was wearing men's clothing. The belt that was slightly too wide for her was tightly wrapped around her slender waist. It was so small that it could not be grasped easily. As she leaped down from the horse, it curved like an admirable crescent moon. Tan Siwei blushed when he saw her. He lowered his head and said, "It's my pleasure to be able to solve the case with Lady Ning. I've sent people to bring back the 11 beggars who lived under the bridge where Miss Qi was found. The interrogation has just begun. Lady Ning, please come in." Tan Siwei personally led the way. Ning Shu didn't stand on ceremony with him. She put down the horsewhip and followed him inside. "Ayo, this matter really doesn't have anything to do with us. Who would have thought that no, this young lady is actually the daughter of the Marquis." In the Supreme Court's prison, 11 unkempt beggars with dirty faces and dirty bodies were crying out in unison in front of the iron bars. Tan Siwei glanced at them and said, "Don't be in such a hurry to cry out your grievances. Since the person was found under your bridge, it must have something to do with you. Don't even think about trying to fish in troubled waters. If you're smart, it's best to tell the truth about everything you know. That way, you might be able to atone for your crimes by performing meritorious deeds. Or, it might be beneficial to the case and you might even get extra rewards. If you're not smart, don't even think about taking a step out of the Supreme Court's prison." Ning Shu didn't expect that Tan Shaoqing's mind would be so clear despite his young appearance. No wonder he was able to sit in the position of Shaoqing of the Supreme Court in just a few years. It was obvious that he was talented. Tan Siwei's words caused the rowdy beggars to quickly settle down and stop making noise. Ning Shu thanked Tan Siwei and stepped forward to ask, "May I ask, when did the Qi family's fourth young miss appear among you? The first person to answer will be rewarded more." The beggars who were sentenced to prison weren't afraid, but if they answered well, they would be rewarded. Thus, they all cooperated. It was late last night. We were sleeping soundly and didn't even know what time it was outside. Suddenly, we heard a series of horse hooves approaching in our dreams. We thought it was some family's carriage passing by and didn't think much of it, so we went back to sleep. Not long after, we heard another noise. It sounded like a heavy gunny sack had been thrown in. We were woken up by the noise and opened our eyes in a daze. We found that there really was a gunny sack and there was a living thing moving inside. We woke up in fright and hurriedly got up to see what was going on. Then, we saw a carriage parked not far away. Chapter 182. Who was the one driving the carriage? Do you still remember the appearance or the characteristics of the driver? The breed of the horse, the color, the carvings on the carriage, and other information. As long as you remember, no matter how big or small, tell me everything. Ning Shu thought that the 11 witnesses here would at least give some useful information. Unexpectedly, the 11 of them shook their heads at the same time. "We didn't see clearly, there are so many of you. How can you not remember a single one?" Ning Shu asked with a frown. The beggars looked at each other guiltily, and then shrank their necks and said, "Because that person threw a bag of broken silver at us. Then we were busy picking up the silver and didn't look carefully. When we finished picking up the silver, the carriage had already run away with the people." Ning Shu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That person could be considered to have a good understanding of human nature. This trick was really good. At the side, the official who participated in the interrogation whipped the beggars and said angrily, "A group of good-for-nothings who only care about money." The beggars dodged and cried, "Let the lords know. We thought that some manner was punishing a disobedient servant or a concubine who made a mistake. When we saw that the person in the bag was crazy, we didn't dare to provoke her. Who would have thought that it was Hu Fu's daughter? If we knew the truth in advance, even if it was 10,000 taels of gold, we wouldn't dare to pick it up." This kind of meaningless whipping did not have any effect. Ning Shu reached out and stopped them. She thought for a moment and continued to ask, "Where is the cloth bag that contained the fourth daughter of the Qi family now?" A beggar at the side took out the cloth bag from his arms and volunteered, "It's here." Ning Shu took the cloth bag from his hand and carefully looked at it from front to back. Her eyes flashed, and then she used her fingers to pinch a few fine grass pieces from the gap of the cloth. She put it to the tip of her nose and sniffed it. Her eyes looked thoughtful. "Do you remember the direction that the carriage came from?" "I remember that one. It's from the north of the bridge." After Ning Shu asked the last question, she walked out of the prison with Tan Siwei and the others. She put the grass to the tip of her nose and sniffed it a few times. Then, she deliberated and said, "Lord Tan, please send your officers and brothers to search the northern part of the city from house to house, with the bridge as the center, to search for cattle, horses, sheep, and other peddlers, or those who sell livestock and fodder. The distance should be within 5 li, at most 10 li." An official from the Supreme Court saw how arbitrary she was and asked suspiciously, "Why is that?" She was a woman, and a woman with a bad reputation at that. So what if she had solved the Phoenix Terrace case? Didn't they all say that she had an expert guiding her from behind? Moreover, the interrogation just now was really nonsense. How did she come to a conclusion? Could it be that she was deliberately mystifying things? Ning Shu was not the least bit annoyed by the questioning gazes around her. She had experienced so many vicious glares and curses that this was nothing to her. Ning Shu curled her lips into a decent smile and explained in detail in an orderly manner, "There are city patrol officers patrolling the capital every night. If the other party was driving a carriage at night and was accidentally seen by the city patrol officers, they would definitely be questioned. If I were the other party, I would definitely not take a detour to transport the Qi family's fourth young mistress out of hiding. Instead, I would choose a place that was relatively close or not too far away to abandon her and leave immediately. This way, I would have the greatest chance of avoiding the city patrol officers. In addition, my daughter's nose is naturally more sensitive. Although these grass have been left here for a long time and have long dried up, there is still a lingering smell. It is very similar to a type of fodder called alfalfa that is used to raise livestock. Therefore, my daughter secretly thought that this cloth bag was undoubtedly used to store fodder. In addition, before I came to the Supreme Court, I saw the Qi family's fourth young mistress and smelled, an unpleasant smell on her body. Ning Shu did not say directly that the smell on Qi Juanyu's body was the stench of livestock manure. Chapter 183. After Ning Shu finished speaking, the official still didn't seem to believe her on the surface. Ning Shu didn't say anything more. Investigating the case was more important, and arguing would only waste time. She secretly sighed in her heart. These people were not as efficient as Xiahou Qing's men. Tan Siwei took the few pieces of grass in Ning Shu's hand and carefully looked at them. Then, he clapped his hands and praised, "Lady Ning is right. I will immediately take people to search from house to house. Thank you, Lord Tan, for your trust. I will rely on you for this matter." After asking Tan Siwei for help again, Ning Shu immediately took her leave. Not far away, someone was waiting for her. It was Chun Niang of Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing Tower. Perhaps she had been waiting for a while. Chun Niang had been tiptoeing around the corner of the Supreme Court's entrance. When she saw Ji Yunshu coming, she immediately waved her hand. Ning Shu's eyes lit up. She stepped forward and said, "Chun Niang, I asked you to ask your sisters about the matter. Did you find any clues?" Chun Niang said, "In the past few days, I've asked all the sisters I know, and they also asked their own acquaintances. Only then did I get some vague information from one of the sisters. But I don't know if it's useful or not. I wonder if it can help eldest Miss Ning." Ning Shu smiled and said, "I have troubled you these days. When the case is solved, I will definitely invite you to drink. As for whether it is useful or not, you can tell me. I will judge for myself. Then I will remember. Lady Ning, don't think you can get away with this wine." Chun Niang covered her mouth and laughed with Ji Yunshu. Then, she returned to the topic, "It's like this. Li Niang of Chonghua Tower once received a guest. That guest used to come to her every few days. He could be considered her old lover. That guy is called Feng San-er. He used to be a traveling merchant who sold leather goods. He traveled between the western regions and the capital all year round. He had a mouth that could coax people to death. But his appearance was really frightening. There was a big lump on his forehead. Because his appearance was not good, he was always disliked by women. He often went out to sell goods and was not in the capital. He was worried that his wife might not be obedient at home even if he got married. So, he has been single for so many years. Every 10 to 15 days, he would come to me." Li Niang of Chonghua Tower cracked a small piece of medicine to add color to the pill while telling Ning Shu what she knew about the past. She was a woman who had long passed her prime, but she was still full of charm. Every move of hers was filled with the charm of a young girl. Ning Shu quickly caught on. He used to sell leather goods. Does that mean he changed his profession? Miss is smart. Li Niang's red lips curled up. She looked at Ning Shu from head to toe, but before I say anything, I have to make it clear to Miss. My relationship with him is just that of a buyer and seller. There is no such thing as a private relationship. No matter what he did, it has nothing to do with me. Ning Shu understood her concerns and said, "That is natural." Li Niang put down the medicine and walked to the window to dry it. Then, she began to talk. About 10 years ago, at that time, this person sold leather goods for a living. He had some money in his hands. But this person was really ugly and liked to abuse women. He would often leave whip marks and blood marks on the women's bodies. No sisters in the tower were willing to accept him as a customer, so the brothel mother forced him to me. At that time, I had just been sold to Chonghua Tower. My father owed a large gambling debt and I had no choice but to deal with him. Li Niang stretched out her arm, revealing the old scars on her snow-white arm. Some were deep, some were shallow, some were new, and some were old. Layer upon layer, it was a ghastly sight. Ning Shu couldn't help but frown. Chapter 184. Li Niang rolled down her sleeves and covered up the scars. At first, I hated him very much, but as time passed, I figured out a way to deal with him. Later on, the injuries I suffered gradually lessened. Her voice contained a kind of dull sorrow that made Ning Shu's heart ache. Elder sister can embellish it with small petals and pearls to make it look even more special. Ning Shu walked over and placed a few pearls next to Li Niang's hand. Then she said, if you grind the pearls into powder and mix it with 7 whiteness powder, it'll double the effect of removing scars. Elder sister can give it a try. A beauty past her prime wanted to retain her beauty the most. Li Niang stared blankly for a moment, then smiled and nodded. Okay, I'll give it a try tonight. She continued, after interacting with him for another 2 or 3 years, I discovered that he was becoming more and more extravagant. He was much more generous than before when he was selling furs. He didn't even pick up the pieces of silver that fell on the ground. So I asked him what was going on. At that time, he drank some wine and was in a good mood, so he explained to me that he had changed his line of business to selling furs. Although that line of business was profitable, the risks were also high. If he was unlucky enough to encounter bandits along the way, he could still lose money. So he changed his line of business to selling horses. I asked him, is there no risk in selling horses? If he encountered bandits, wouldn't he also be unlucky? He refused to say it clearly, only deliberately mystifying things. Horses are good. Horses are obedient and won't be easily targeted by bandits. Moreover, there'll be someone to take care of them when they arrive, so there's no need to worry about not being able to sell them. If these horses don't listen halfway, they'll be slaughtered and sold for horse meat. In any case, it's just these kinds of repetitive words. I also didn't understand much, so I didn't ask again. Ning Shu said, then what's the connection between this Feng Santong and the strange rumors of humans turning into monsters? About 8 or 9 years ago, there was a very popular stall that raised strange beasts in the capital. Every day, they would set up stalls all over the capital to attract customers. One day, they set up a stall in front of our magnificent Splendor building, attracting many people. I also watched from the window upstairs for a long time. I saw the stall owner instructing the strange beasts under his control to kowtow to people and write a few auspicious words. In exchange, he would receive a large sum of money. Every day, he could be considered to be earning a lot of money. I couldn't help but sigh. They both came out to sell their smiles, but why was it so easy to earn money from them? I've been going through hell and back. Feng San happened to be next to me that day. He sneered while drinking. His smile was strange and mysterious. I was very curious, so I poured him a lot of wine and asked him if he knew the reason behind it. In a daze, he muttered, this thing is made of flesh and blood. 10 human lives in exchange for 1 spirit. Remember, it's 10. Then he let out a chattering laugh and fell asleep. When he woke up, he refused to say a single word and even whipped me. 10 human lives in exchange for a spiritual monster. What did that mean? Ning Shu thought about it several times in her heart, but she still couldn't understand. She suppressed her curiosity for the time being and continued to ask, did Feng San look for you recently? Now that I think about it, he hasn't been here for a while. The last time he came to find me was 2 months ago. Either he went to sell his horse again, or he got tired of me and went to find another woman. Who knows? Li Niang sneered, if he got tired of me, it's a good thing. But the other girls will have to suffer again. Sister, do you know where Feng San lives? Let me think. I seem to have heard him mention it before. Ning Shu's mouth was sweet. Li Niang was very happy to hear her calling her sister. She seriously thought about it for her. After a while, she suddenly realized, it seems to be the drinking horse alley. Yes. It's there, in the north of the city, drinking horse alley number 13. I don't know if it's number 15. You can go there and ask. Ning Shu stood up. The drinking horse alley in the north of the city happened to be 4 or 5 li away from the bridge where the beggars live. There, it was very likely there. Chapter 185. After running around like a headless fly for so many days, Ning Shu finally found two threads that were connected together. Ning Shu couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. She solemnly thanked Li Niang and immediately ordered someone to invite Tan Siwei and also sent someone to inform Hui Mo. She had a hunch that Hui Mo would come in handy. Wow, what's this smell? As soon as they walked into Yin Ma Alley, a group of people was staggered by the strong pungent smell. Hui Mo covered his mouth and nose and curiously stood at the entrance of the alley to look inside. It was difficult to describe what kind of smell it was. It was fishy, stinky, greasy, and rotten. It was as if every piece of mud in the alley was soaked in this complex smell. It was much more layered than the smell of corpses in the mass grave. It aroused Hui Mo's great interest. Compared to talking and asking about longevity locks from house to house, it was much more interesting to do an autopsy. This alley is located in the north of the city and is relatively remote. Most of the people living here are butchers who slaughter pigs and sheep. In other places, they may be looked down upon. Only here, no one despised each other. So slowly, more and more people came to live here. Let's walk inside and find someone to ask. Ning Shu neatly stepped down from the horse. Okay. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell was. The officials of the Supreme Court could not help but cover their mouths and noses. They stood at the entrance of the alley and reluctantly walked inside. But they saw Lady Ning did not blink. She held the hem of her robe and walked into the alley without any hesitation. While walking, she sniffed the disgusting air as if she was trying to distinguish something. The officials thought, she is indeed the first female general of Great Yu. She is indeed extraordinary. She is so scary. Tan Siwei clumsily climbed down from the horse and quickly followed Ning Shu's footsteps. He walked in front of her and Hui Mo. He knocked on the door of a house and asked. Soon, he found out that Feng San lived in the deepest part of the alley, number 15. The officials of the Supreme Court had a trap and trotted to the door before Tan Siwei. Is there anyone in? The government is handling a case. There was no response. Stop knocking, it won't open. Ning Shu's nose twitched, and her face tightened. Under everyone's surprised gaze, she whispered, I smell the stench of a corpse. The door was kicked open by Hui Mo with a loud bang, and the door squeaked in pain. Logically speaking, even if the people present hadn't personally solved a case, it was common to see corpses. But this time, they were still shocked by the scene in front of them. A timid official collapsed on the ground and pointed at the bloody thing in the courtyard and shouted, Wolf, wolf demon. This was a wolf demon. There really is a wolf demon. Because that thing clearly looked like a human. It had a head, 4 limbs, arms, and thighs. It was about the same length as an ordinary person, but its entire body was covered in black wolf fur. Every tip of the fur was stained with black dried blood. The crowd had long heard of the rumors of the wolf demon. When they saw the scene in front of them, they instinctively took a few steps back, wishing that they could escape immediately. So, this case has been solved. The legendary wolf demon that pestered the 4th Miss of Qi for revenge and made her disappear and go crazy really exist. Even Ning Shu couldn't help but shrink her pupils when she saw the horrible scene in front of her. But she quickly calmed down and called Hui Mo. Hui Mo immediately took out 2 pairs of pig-soaked gloves and handed them to Ning Shu. Then, the two squatted in front of the strange corpse in front of everyone's eyes. Chapter 186. Is it a monster? It doesn't look like it. Its limbs, torso, and head are clearly in the shape of a human. If it's really a monster that has cultivated for hundreds of years and has a human form, it's too cowardly to die so casually. In front of the officers of the Supreme Court, Ning Shu and Hui Mo squatted on the left and right sides of the wolf demon. They rolled up their sleeves and stretched out their hands to touch the bloody thorns that made people tremble in fear. As the two of them fought, they also cracked jokes that gave people goosebumps all over their bodies. I think so too. If it was killed so easily, the threshold of becoming a monster is too low. Ning Shu nodded at Hui Mo as she turned over the demon corpse covered with sharp black wolf fur with him. Ning Shu carefully searched the demon corpse that was neither human nor demon. Her expression was serious and she didn't mind the wonderful smell and the beautiful scene at all. She had already made 2 officers vomit. Soon, she found the mystery. She lifted a piece of sticky flesh from the back of the monster corpse's neck with her hand wearing a pig's blister glove. From this cut, it should be that someone poured boiling water from the back of the monster corpse. After the skin was scalded, a cut was made from the back of the neck. Then the skin was slowly peeled off and fresh wolf skin was pasted on the bones and flesh without skin. Judging from how the skin and flesh fit together, the other party did it quite seriously and tightly. The places where the wolf skin was joined together and the places where it didn't fit tightly were even sewn together with a needle and thread, making it impossible for people to see any flaws at first glance. TSK, what a skillful embroidery. Looking at the corpse of the wolf demon that could be said to be perfect, Ning Shu was not stingy with her praise. Hearing this, the officers who were vomiting on the wall turned pale and vomited even more violently. Even Tan Siwei's face changed. He was shocked by Ning Shu's fierce action. After mocking, Ning Shu restrained her expression and said seriously, "Why don't you guess who this dead man is?" Tan Siwei thought for a while. "Feng-san?" "Yes." Ning Shu pointed at the bump on the wolf demon's forehead. "Everyone, look here." Although his skin has been peeled off, the sarcoma on his forehead is still there. According to Li Niang's description, it matches Feng-san's without a doubt. After saying that, her tone changed and she revealed a thoughtful expression. "But, where did his skin go? Could it be?" Her eyes followed her thoughts and slowly moved to the abdomen of the corpse, then stopped. "Don't tell me it's inside." Opposite him, Hui Mo took a deep breath as if he had a toothache. "That's too miserable. Should we dissect it?" Ning Shu nodded. "Cut it open. Even if it's a torn piece of paper, we have to find a way to put the pieces back together, let alone a whole piece of human skin." Hui Mo hesitated, "But it's been dead for about 3 days. Even if it's still there, it's probably rotten." Ning Shu, on the other hand, was more open-minded. "Let's just give it a try. As long as we can find a piece or 2, it will confirm our guess." "Okay then." Hui Mo began to take out the knife and took a wooden basin to feed the horse water from the manger next to him. He splashed it with water and prepared it for later use. Ning Shu helped. Before cutting the knife, she said to Tan Siwei and others, "We will dissect the body here. Please search this room. Maybe you can find a lot of useful things." People in the Supreme Judiciary were relieved. They rushed into Feng-san's room and began to search for suspicious evidence. Ning Shu couldn't help laughing. She looked at Hui Mo and the sharp knife flashed with silver light. She cut the rotten meat exposed after the wolf skin was peeled off. "So, we already know some details of the case." In Prince Namping's mansion, Xiahou Qing slowly pushed a cup of tea in front of Ning Shu. Then he picked up another cup and put it to his lips. Chapter 187. Ning Shu silently watched him leisurely sip his tea. She then looked at the wooden basin filled with indescribable things that she had placed not too far away. She thought to herself, "The people from the Supreme Court are secretly saying that I'm a freak. That's because they haven't seen Xiahou Qing yet." Even if his sense of smell failed and his eyes couldn't see, he clearly knew that the wooden basin filled with Feng-san's things was right next to him. Not only did he not feel uncomfortable in his heart, he could still elegantly drink his tea. Just this kind of willpower alone was above hers. At the very least, she couldn't eat anything right now. She would have to wait until she calmed down. Quietly pushing the cup of tea and refreshments to the side, Ning Shu said, "I think the motive for the crime has already been revealed. If my guess is correct, the head of that vaudeville troupe should have already been decapitated." Not long after, Juicy came in with the information he had just found out. That troupe leader surnamed Sun had indeed died 6 years ago. The reason for his death was recorded in the records was that he had been bitten to death by a wild beast. His death was also exceptionally tragic. Ning Shu's guess was confirmed. Xiahou Qing put down his teacup and gently tapped his finger on the table a few times. He slowly said, "So you're saying that this is a case of revenge spanning many years. Whether it's that troop leader surnamed Sun, Feng-san, or Qi Zhuanyu, they were all targets of the other party's revenge?" Ning Shu took a deep breath. Many images flashed through her mind. There was Feng San covered in wolf skin, the deranged Qi Juanyu, and the little wolf demon who had been dragged to death by a carriage several years ago. For a moment, she didn't know whether to feel more indignant or more sorrowful. She only felt her entire body turn cold, as if she was in the middle of winter. She softly opened her mouth and said, "Yes." She took out a booklet that looked like an account book from her sleeve. After opening it, she saw that the handwriting was crooked and full of mistakes. Li Niang confirmed that it was Feng San's writing. Several dozen thin pieces of account book were thrown onto the road. Most passers-by would find the words ugly and smelly and refuse to pick them up. However, it recorded an event that made people's souls tremble. Ning Shu's soft voice slowly read the words recorded in the booklet. At this moment, because of the content she was reading, her voice condensed into a layer of chilling ice. Even the few tender yellow sparrows on the flower shelf silently stopped chirping. Year 13 of Heaven's Selection, 17th of May. What bad luck. This time, we met with robbers again. They didn't even leave behind a single piece of skin for me. This trip was for nothing and I even lost my capital. Tomorrow, I will definitely kill the whole family of these robbers. The 14th year of Heaven's Selection, the 10th day of the 12th month. Counting this year, I've earned a total of 75 taels of silver. Not bad. I'm not young anymore, it's time for me to find a wife to play with. I heard that the Shu family's daughter in the neighboring alley is quite pretty, hey. In the 14th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 23rd of December, matchmaker Zhong came over and said that when Miss Shu heard that I was proposing marriage, she cried so hard that she wanted to hang herself. Son of a bitch. Isn't it because I'm ugly and poor? I'm going to throw a dead dog into their house tonight. Silvers, silvers, silvers. I'm going to earn a lot of silvers. When the day comes that my family is rich, I'm going to make those girls cry and beg me. In the 15th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 24th day of the 7th month, the price of everything in this year except for my wallet. Fuck his grandmother, I ruthlessly beat up Li Niang from the magnificent tower. When that whore was begging for mercy, she said that her life was bitter. Her father gambled and sold her to a brothel. Heh! You don't say, if one is sold for 50 taels of silver, then wouldn't 10 be worth 500 taels of silver? If I sell 100 of them, wouldn't I be rich? Interesting. In the 15th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 7th day of the 9th month, I used a piece of candy to coax that little fatty from the Longan alley. That brat foolishly followed me. I pinched him until he fainted and sold his head. I got 20 taels of silver. I have an idea. In the 15th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 15th day of the 10th month, I bought a few horses as a cover. Horses, you better obediently wait for me to sell you for money. If you're not obedient, I can only skin you and sell you as meat. Hee. In the 16th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 19th day of the 2nd month, when I was transporting people out of the city with Head Zhong, I was almost discovered by the officials. I was scared to death. Head Zhong said that there have been too many missing children in the capital recently. The officials are investigating very closely, so he doesn't dare to act rashly. He told me to do as I see fit. That son of a bitch. He wants to quit, but I still have a dozen little bastards tied up in my cellar. What should I do? In the 16th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 27th day of the 2nd month, a dozen little bastards. Feeding them every day costs me 1 tael of silver. Fuck, fuck, fuck. If this goes on, I'm going to lose money again. Should I just kill them? In the 16th year of Heaven's Selection, on the 6th day of the 3rd month, I have an idea. When I was selling leather goods to southern Yang country, I happened to hear about something called a human bear. Chapter 188. Reading to this point, Ning Shu's voice came to an abrupt stop. She had already roughly flipped through it before, but at this moment, she still felt as if something cold had pierced her bones, causing her to feel cold from the inside out. It was difficult for her to read a single word from the book. This was because the evil of human nature recorded in the book was difficult to describe. Xiahou Qing's expression changed as he called out, "Juicy." He signaled for Juicy to bring the book over and read it for Ning Shu. But she refused. No need, I can do it. Xiahou Qing frowned and disagreed. Why are you blindly showing off? Are you trying to show off your bravery? Ning Shu said in a low voice, I'm not showing off. It's just that if I'm afraid of these few lines, then I don't need to continue working on this case. It had to be known that what really happened in this case was 10 times more terrifying than what was recorded in the book. She persisted like a thin bamboo that had just broken out of the ground not long ago. It was obvious that she could be broken by the strong wind and rain at any time, but she still stubbornly refused to bow down to anyone or anything. Her soft voice startled Xiahou Qing, as if the first cicada in early summer had stirred his heart. He turned his face away and sneered, do as you wish. He pursed his lips and listened to her shallow breathing. Then he awkwardly added, if you can't read it, then slow down first. In any case, I won't die for a while, so there's no rush. His words were stiff, but there was a different kind of gentleness in his tone. It was like a warm sun in winter, making Ning Shu feel flattered for a moment. Was this the Crown Prince's way of expressing his concern? It was really special. Ning Shu couldn't help but smile. A small piece of the ice in her heart unknowingly melted, making her feel less cold. She took a deep breath and read the book in her hand word by word. This thing called a human bear turns a living person into a bear. First, he prepared a fresh bearskin that had just been peeled off. Then, he tied the selected person to a bamboo pole and flipped them over. Starting from the back of the neck, he scalded the skin with hot water and peeled it off bit by bit. Then, he pasted the fresh bearskin on it and wrapped it securely with a cloth. When the skin was done, the man-bear would be almost done. That drunken busker had told Lousy, you must choose a child under the age of 10, the younger the better. That way, after being skinned, the flesh and blood will quickly grow together with the animal skin, and you won't be able to peel it off. About 1 out of 10 would survive. When they were alive, their tongues would be cut off so that they could no longer speak human language. Then they would be locked in cages for a long period of time, whipped and domesticated. They would be constantly told that they were beasts, born to be trampled upon by others. They would kowtow to others so that they would not have the slightest intention of rebellion. Once all these things were done, they could pretend to be demons caught in the mountains and drag them out to perform. Other than human bears, there were also human dogs, human wolves, and human sheep. Almost all of them were created in the same way. Those idiots on the streets definitely haven't seen this kind of new toy. Lousy has thought it through. I will first make a human wolf. 10 copper coins for a kowtow, 1 tael of silver for an auspicious message. There are so many rich young masters and young ladies in the capital, I can easily earn a lot of money. Little bastards, just wait obediently for Lousy. You have to live a little longer, ha ha ha. 16 years of natural selection, 7th of the 5th month, success. Success. 12 little bastards died, but one of them was finally revived for Lousy. However, Lousy has been kidnapping a little too many people recently, and the errand boys have been wandering around the area. This little wolf demon is a little troublesome. That's right, I will sell it to old Sun from the vaudeville class. When the time comes, we will split the money equally. 16 years of natural selection, 7th of the 6th month, Lousy has earned 80 taels in 1 month. Lousy is rich, ha ha ha. Don't worry, wait for Lousy to create a human sheep, then I will earn double the money. 16 years of natural selection, 15th of the 7th month, unlucky. The wolf demon that Lousy painstakingly created was actually killed by a little girl. Lousy really wants to strangle her to death, but she is the young miss of the Marquis estate, so I can only suffer in silence. Fortunately, that little girl paid a few taels of silver, so it's not a loss. H. What's there to be afraid of with one dead? Lousy can still create another one. 19 years of natural selection, 4th of the 4th month, old Sun from the vaudeville class died. Recently, I have been feeling that something is watching Lousy. I have earned quite a lot of money these 2 years, should I stop? Skipping a lot of useless nonsense in the middle, Ning Shu quickly flipped to the page with this year's latest records. 25 years of natural selection, 3rd of the 3rd month, living hell. Recently, There have been people who have been stuffing notes into Lao's room with the words, "Waiting for your death date." There is even a wolf claw printed on it. Fuck. What is this thing? Could it be the one from 9 years ago, 25 years of natural selection, 4th of the 4th month, it's over, that thing has finally found me. Chapter 189. In the thin booklet, the stench and filth of human nature were undoubtedly revealed. Every word seemed to be dripping blood, which made the listeners feel uncomfortable and nauseous. Hui Mo's hands trembled as he listened. He gritted his teeth and said, "This beast, no, this thing is worse than a pig or a dog. He can't even be regarded as a beast. It's too easy for him to die so easily. He should be dismembered into pieces." Finally, after reading the important parts of the booklet, Ning Shu closed the booklet. She only felt a cluster of fire burning in her heart. She couldn't wait to drag Feng San, who stretched out his evil hands to the children, back from hell and pay him back 10 times or 100 times what he had done. She exhaled a long breath and forcibly suppressed the cluster of fire in her heart. She analyzed, according to the records of this booklet and the known clues, we can roughly infer this part of the case. Feng San first made a living by selling leather goods. Because of his ugly appearance and mediocre family background, he was disliked by others. He was resentful at first, evil at second, and greedy at second. He began to abduct children. But gradually, simply selling children could no longer satisfy his greed. So, from 9 years ago, Feng San made the children into wolf monsters and bear monsters. He cooperated with the leader of the juggling class to make money. Then, the child was accidentally killed by Qi Zhuanyu as an animal. In addition to that child, the number of children who were killed by him may be hundreds. At present, Feng San is dead. Leader Sun was also killed 6 years ago. Qi Zhuanyu became crazy. From the experience of these 3 people, I suspect that this series of cases was done by the relatives of the child who was killed that year. The purpose is very simple: revenge. A few days ago, after Qi Zhuanyu disappeared in the fragrant hall, it is very likely that she was taken to Feng San's residence and trapped. Qi Zhuanyu's strange behavior of kowtowing and saying auspicious words, as well as the words "give me back my skin" in her mouth, all have an explanation. Because she saw with her own eyes that Feng San was skinned alive, and then she saw the other party forcefully shove the skin peeled off from Feng San's body into his stomach. Just thinking about that scene made her scalp tingle. Even the other party may have threatened Qi Zhuanyu to use the same method to deal with her. It would be strange if Qi Zhuanyu was not scared out of her wits. How can there be such an evil person like Feng San? And that leader Sun, he deserved to die. Including that Miss Qi, she thought they were livestock, so she wantonly killed them. What is the reason? Hui Mo's face was full of anger and confusion. The murderer we are looking for is obviously doing justice for heaven. If we really find him, according to the law, that person will definitely be severely punished. His life might even be in danger. Are we really doing the right thing? Ning Shu sighed. I also hate people like Feng San. I feel that he deserves to be punished, but the people who execute him shouldn't be anyone else, but the government. If everyone acted according to their own personal grievances, then the result would only be civil unrest. Everyone would be in danger, and order would be lost. How could the common people live a stable life then? Therefore, we can sympathize with the murderer, but we have to catch him. We have no other choice. Seeing that Hui Mo was still not convinced, Ning Shu said again, "Do you know why the murderer killed Feng San and leader Sun, but only let Qi Zhuanyu go? She was scared out of her wits and was released." Hui Mo guessed. Maybe it was because Qi Zhuanyu was young and ignorant at that time. Did she really think that the child was a monster and didn't deserve to die? Uncle Ning didn't express his opinion, maybe, but maybe he had other plans. Hui Mo was puzzled. What plans? He hated Qi Zhuanyu so much that he didn't want to kill her so quickly. So he wanted to do it slowly, just like a big cat that caught a mouse. He didn't rush to eat it, but held it in his palm and tortured it slowly. He had tasted loss, sadness, and despair. Now, he wanted to let Qi Zhuanyu's relatives taste it one by one. So he let Qi Zhuanyu go first, so that the Qi family would have hope. Then he killed Qi Juanyu in front of the Qi family, turning the hope into 100 times more despair in an instant. Hui Mo was stunned, then the whole Qi family would go crazy. The sunlight in the middle of April was beginning to burn her eyes, so Ning Shu raised her hand to cover them and said softly, "Yes, this is the most terrifying and perfect revenge." Chapter 190. Hui Mo still tried to insist, This is just your guess. The next revenge may not happen. Maybe the murderer has already stopped. Don't forget the sign, crazy, and violent death. Xiahou Qing, who had been listening to Ning Shu quietly under the west window, opened his mouth slowly and shattered Hui Mo's pure extravagance. Killing people can sometimes be addictive. He killed leader Sun and Feng San with his own hands. When he killed the devil, he slowly turned himself into a devil. Isn't that thing the proof? Xiahou Qing casually tossed the pair of jade chopsticks he had prepared for tea and snacks into the wooden basin not far away that contained Feng San's stomach. Hui Mo opened his mouth and lowered his head. He couldn't exonerate the murderer. Xiahou Qing asked, "Besides this book, did you find any other clues or evidence?" Ning Shu answered honestly, "There were a few notes, which were mentioned by Feng San. Since last month, they have been stuffed in his door. The handwriting on them was deliberately crooked, so it was difficult to tell who wrote them. The murderer was really a meticulous person." Now Child Tan is leading the officers of the Supreme Court to ask if they have seen any suspicious people in the Enma Alley recently. I hope he can find something. Although the hope might be a little slim. Ning Shu couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. However, Xiahou Qing suddenly frowned. "Child Tan? Are you familiar with him?" Ning Shu was stunned for a moment and said, "Not very familiar." "Since you are not familiar with him, don't you think it is too careless to call an official of the imperial court so casually?" He looked very indifferent. Except for the slight frown just now, there was no unusual emotion on his face. However, Ning Shu still felt that he was faintly unhappy. After a moment of speechlessness, Ning Shu hurriedly said, "It's my fault for breaking the law. Your Highness, you are right. I will keep it in mind." She thought her attitude was sincere enough, but she didn't expect that Xiahou Qing's face was even darker after hearing it. She sighed in her heart. She didn't know what she did to make this master unhappy. She had to tactfully shut her mouth and stop talking, so as not to add fuel to the fire. No sound could be heard from the other side of the tea table. Only her light, wind-like breathing could be heard. Xiahou Qing could almost imagine that the girl sitting opposite him under the west window must have a very innocent expression on her face, pretending to be obedient. Perhaps she was thinking that he was too unreasonable and too difficult to please. She had known him for more than a month and still politely called him Your Highness, but she could already affectionately call Tan Siwei, whom she had only known for 3 or 4 days, young Master Tan. There really was a difference between being close and distant. According to Qianwen's report, a few days ago, Princess Hixin paid a special visit to Prime Minister Tan's residence. In the end, she and the Prime Minister's wife affectionately went to the West Market to buy brocade jewelry. Xiahou Qing's lips curved up slightly. It was a smile that wasn't a smile, but it made Ning Shu feel like she was sitting on pins and needles. She silently reflected. Could it be that her efficiency was too low and she still hadn't solved the case, which made him dissatisfied? Just as she was reflecting, Xiahou Qing, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. "Where do you plan to start investigating next?" Ning Shu, who had been tense the entire time, finally let out a sigh of relief. After a moment of silence, she said, "Feng San is dead. We have no way of knowing which children he kidnapped and who their relatives are. However, I feel that Qi Juanyu's disappearance that night has a lot to do with the people around her. So I want to investigate first. Among the 6 maids and maids, I want to see if any of their relatives were kidnapped." Chapter 191. In addition, I'm thinking of another question. The fact that the other party spent 9 years to track down Feng San and take revenge shows that his ability may not be as strong as we think. However, to set up the case of the curse of the 8 characters in the palace and quietly kidnap and hide Qi Juanyu from the palace is not something an ordinary person can do. The contradiction between the two is very contradictory, and I really can't figure it out, unless Xiahou Qing's mind was unusually sharp. Before Ning Xu finished her words, he had already caught on. Are you trying to say that there is more than one culprit and more than one case in this case? Exactly. Ning Xu nodded hard. So far, the pieces of the demon wolf case have been pieced together, but Wen Siren's part is still unknown. There is no trace of connection between him and the demon wolf case. So, is there a possibility that these two cases are independent of each other, but because of some unknown reason, they are invisibly linked together? Xiahou Qing agreed with her guess. Your guess is reasonable. Then let's follow this direction. It is very likely that the day the culprit of the demon wolf case is the day the truth of the curse of the 8 characters will be solved. This vague case was like a flower in the mirror and the moon in the water. After layers of analysis, they finally got the general outline. Ning Xu could not help but feel excited. She did not wait for a moment. She immediately got up and left, preparing to keep an eye on the Qi family. First, she wanted to check on the 6 maids and maids. Second, she wanted to always be on guard against the other half of the curse of the 8 characters, the unnatural death of Qi Zhuanyu. Just as she stepped out of the hall, Xiahou Qing suddenly called her from behind, "Come back." Her. She turned around. At this time, the afternoon sun showed a dazzling golden color. It passed through the delicate and complicated lines on the window lattice and fell on Xiahou Qing's body, shining brightly on him, as if he was glowing. In the golden light, he raised his head slightly and looked in the direction of Ning Xu, saying slowly, "No one forced you to be brave and not afraid. You are not a machine to solve cases. You are a human, a woman. Anger, joy, pity, fear. You can have all the emotions a normal person should have. Don't suppress yourself." Ning Xu was stunned for a moment before she realized what he meant. She was obviously very resistant to the contents of Feng San's book, but she still forced herself to finish reading it. In her clear eyes, half of his jade-colored face was almost transparent under the sunlight, while the other half was in the shadows. It was dark and powerful. Under the intertwining of light and darkness, the curve of his face was particularly clear, and it was also particularly attractive. Ning Xu couldn't help but turn her face away. But too much emotion will affect the judgment of the case. What if I make a mistake or make a mistake? Xiahou Qing smiled faintly. His voice was as clear and deep as ever. What do you mean by relying on you alone? Then what's the use of me? Her heart skipped a beat. Ning Xu's cheeks crept up with a light cherry-red color, just like the newly formed bud at the end of the flowering tree in the great Xianghua temple that was 10 li away. The layers of petals tightly wrapped around the red color. "Young miss." Hearing Zigui's call, Ning Xu quickly came back to her senses and said, "You just said that the maidservant called Cai you lost a younger brother and has not found him yet." "I'm listening. Go on." Zigui nodded and continued, "The Huayu clan also lost a female cousin. That cousin was about the same age as her. She went missing in the 15th year of natural selection, during the Lantern Festival. What about Xiong-jin? Her family didn't lose anyone. However, her childhood sweetheart's family lost a male cousin. There is no news of him to this day. No one knows if he is alive or dead. No one else has." When Ning Xu heard this, she immediately frowned. They had investigated a total of 6 families and found that 3 families had lost their children. This probability was too high. This meant that there were many children who went missing every year in the capital and many parents who cried in despair. Chapter 192. The harder it was to live, the more frequent the cases of young girls and children were. 10 years ago was the year of the disaster in the Hanjiang prefecture. 280,000 people died in one prefecture. Although the capital wasn't filled with starving people and corpses, the lives of many lower-class people were still extremely difficult. Think about it, when the adults couldn't survive, how could they spare the energy to protect their own children? Serves her right. Ning Xu and Zigui followed Xiong-jin all the way to secretly leave the Qi estate. They arrived at the home of her childhood sweetheart, the imperial bodyguard. Jumping up a tree, They hid behind the thick branches and quietly watched as Seong-jin fed the imperial bodyguard medicine while cursing to her heart's content. If you ask me, it's because fourth young miss has done too many bad things. Now that she's met her retribution, she's become neither human nor ghost. She's so crazy, it really makes people happy. The imperial bodyguard worriedly said, "You've been sneaking out these past few days. Aren't you too conspicuous? It's better if you quickly return to the estate. Otherwise, if someone finds out and reports it to master and madam, you'll be punished again." Being bedridden for a long time caused his entire body to become thin and yellow. However, one could still see from his tall frame and facial features that he was once a dignified youth. Unfortunately, he was buried by Chi Juanyu's hands. Seong-jin didn't care at all. What are you afraid of? Right now, the estate is in chaos. Everyone is surrounding fourth young miss, afraid that she'll go crazy from kowtowing or commit suicide by hitting the wall. Who has the time to care about where I go? If you ask me, since that wolf demon was able to secretly take revenge on her once, he can take revenge on her a second time. Even if everyone in the estate is watching, it's useless. She won't be able to escape. Although you say that, it's still better to be careful. First, if someone suspects that the matter is related to you, causing trouble for no reason, then it'll be hard to explain. Second, the imperial bodyguard turned his head and pretended to joke. Second, you've reached the age where you should marry. If you keep circling around a good-for-nothing like me, I'm afraid people will gossip. If this affects your good marriage, I, as your older brother, will feel guilty for the rest of my life. The coarse porcelain spoon in her hand fell back into the soup bowl with a clatter. Mai Jin stood up and bit her lip. What are you talking about? I've already said that I won't marry anyone other than you. What's more, the first person fourth miss wanted to punish that night was me. You were the one who took the punishment for me. You were injured because of me. Your body was crippled because of me. Do you want me to be that heartless and despicable woman? Tears welled up in the guard's eyes as he hammered the bed. His eyes were red as he said, "There are many good men in this world. Why do you have to hang on to a piece of trash like me? You know that I won't be able to recover for the rest of my life and will only be a burden to you. How can I give you happiness?" 2 lines of tears slowly crept down Pagoda Jin's face. Her voice trembled as she said, "I don't care about fate. You are my only fate in this life. Even if you're crippled, as long as you're still breathing, I'll be your bride for the rest of my life. If you die today, then I will be your widow, and I will guard your grave for the rest of my life. So don't even think about pushing me away. Why do you have to do this?" Inside the house, the 2 unfortunate lovers hugged each other and cried bitterly. Ning Shu, who was hiding in the tree outside the house, felt her heart ache as she sighed. She quietly put the medicine that Hui Mo had made before on the windowsill. Ning Shu and Zi Gui quietly left. From the analysis of what she had heard just now, Pagoda Jin still thought that Chi Juanyu's ending today was because of the wolf demon's revenge. It seemed that she wasn't the one who did it. And the year when Caiu and Hueyu's children were abducted didn't match the time when Fengsan did evil. The case once again fell into a bottleneck. Chapter 193. Logically speaking, after eliminating the suspects one by one, the remaining one, even if it was impossible, would definitely be the murderer. But the problem was that all the suspects had been eliminated, and not a single one was left. Ning Shu tossed and turned all night, constantly calculating all kinds of possibilities in her mind, but she rejected them again and again. It was only when the sun was about to rise that she vaguely slept for a few hours. When she woke up in the morning, she saw that there were dark circles under her eyes, like the iron-eating beast recorded in the Book of Strange Things. She smiled bitterly and rubbed her dizzy temples. For the 3rd day in a row, she went to the Chi estate to spy. Chi Juoyu had been crazy all night last night, and the servants of the Chi estate were all exhausted, leaning against the doorsill and dozing off. Only a few guards were still healthy, and still had the energy to sit in the corridor and chat. I originally thought that fourth young miss had received a great fortune and was chosen to be the princess consort of the Nanping prince. When I heard the news from the palace that day, master and madam were extremely happy and said that they were going to hold a 10-day banquet to celebrate. Who would have thought that she would fall into such a situation today? This great fortune has turned into a great misfortune. It's really unpredictable and unpredictable. Ari, that's right. Fourth young Miss's appearance at night was very frightening. Do you guys think that there really was a wolf demon causing trouble? Otherwise, why would fourth young Miss be like that? Yes, yes, yes. When she was angry, she would kowtow while muttering things like "Don't skin me, spare my life." TSK TSK, just thinking about it makes me shiver. You guys are really naive. If that wolf demon was really so powerful, how could it have been easily killed by young Miss 9 years ago? You guys have all been deceived. I think that fourth young Miss's current appearance was actually caused by the 13th princess. The two of them had been fighting for the position of Shiz's wife for a long time. Who would have thought that in the end, the fourth Miss would be chosen? The 13th princess was jealous, so she secretly played dirty. Then, she used the wolf demon as a cover to deceive people. Do you remember that on the day fourth young Miss disappeared, the 13th princess pushed her into the water in front of the empress? It's only because she's an imperial princess, the emperor's daughter, that the government didn't dare to close the case. I also think that makes sense. Other than an imperial princess, who else has the ability to make a living person disappear without a trace in the palace? Then what about the curse of the 8 characters? Could it be that the 13th princess knew in advance that our young Miss would be chosen? What if she was the one chosen in the end? It's ridiculous to curse yourself. All right, all of you stop quarreling. If you ask me, I'm afraid the 13th princess will get what she wants. That's not necessarily true. Why not? Which prince's mansion would be willing to take a crazy, delirious person as their princess? Although the Duke of Nanping's estate hasn't brought up the matter of breaking off the engagement, it's only because of Consort Qi and our Marquis's estate. Yesterday, when I was on duty, I heard Master and Madam discussing. They said that Daoist Zhong of Shenqing Temple was invited to take a look. Fourth young Miss's mind is not clear right now because of the displacement of her 3 souls and 7 spirits. They want to do a grand ceremony to invite the person who is related to her by blood and has the most honorable position to summon her scattered soul back to its original position. At that time, fourth young Miss will be able to return to normal. Isn't Imperial Concubine Qi the one with the most honorable status and blood relatives? Would he be able to return to normal after performing a ritual? Is this true or false? The guards chatted with great relish and even began to argue, treating this matter as a joke. Mother Hui had just walked out of the room when she heard this. She immediately frowned and reprimanded, "How dare you talk about Master's matters like this? Are you itching for a beating? Why aren't you scramming and doing your job properly?" Only then did the guards disperse like birds and beasts and disperse to do their work. Only Mother Hui stood in place and let out a long sigh. Chapter 194. Seeing Ning Shu walking over, Mother Hui hurriedly stepped forward and asked expectantly, "Lady Ning, is there any progress in my young Miss's case? Who is the one who harmed my young Miss?" Ning Shu smiled bitterly as an answer. This old servant also knows that this case is very difficult. Otherwise, the government wouldn't have been unable to solve the case for so many days. However, I still have to trouble Lady Ning to worry. Mother Hui used to be a servant in the palace, so her words and actions were all appropriate. This is my duty. Mother Hui, don't worry. I will do my best. While the two were exchanging pleasantries, Ning Shu's gaze shifted and found a sachet beside Mother Hui's feet. The color of the sachet was a bit old, as if it was an antique from many years ago. The red cotton sachet was embroidered with a square Fu character. Ning Shu recognized this thing. It was called Fu Bao. Many children before the age of 10 would wear a red Fu Bao, which contained more than 10 kinds of medicinal herbs and spices to ward off evil spirits. Her mother and Princess Xin had also personally embroidered one for Ji Er. Now, they even asked Ji Er to carry it with her. Ning Shu bent down to pick it up and put it in the palm of her hand. She curiously asked, "Who does this Fu Bao belong to?" Mother Hui hurriedly put the Fu Bao into her arms and said, "Oh, this is the Fu Bao that my young Miss used to wear when she was a child." Later, my young miss grew up and no longer used it, so this old servant took it and kept it. These days, my young miss suffered a lot. I occasionally thought of it, so I took it out and continued to wear it. It can be considered to be a blessing for my young miss. Ning Shu nodded. Then, as usual, she asked Mother Hui a few questions about the night Qi Juanyu went missing. Unsurprisingly, she did not find any useful information. Ning Shu paused for a moment. She really didn't have anything to ask, so she casually said, I remember that day when I went to the fragrant palace to visit fourth young miss. I happened to see the old concubines and concubines of the palaces send a pile of gifts. May I ask where those gifts are now? Can you let me have a look? Ah, the reward you were talking about. Mother Hui was stunned for a moment, as if she was recalling carefully. Then, she said, that evening, Miss told me to send it back to the residence before the palace gate was locked. After that, I wasn't in charge of it anymore. It should have been kept in the storeroom. I'll ask later and get back to you. I'll have to trouble you then. Before the two of them could finish, they heard the room bustling with activity again. Qi Juanyu's screams of struggle could be heard incessantly. Mother Hui, where is Mother Hui? The servant girls hurriedly ran out to ask for help. Mother Hui, quickly come back to the room. Young miss is in trouble again. Mother Hui looked worried. She hurriedly bowed to Ning Shu and left, returning to her room. Not long after she entered the house, the movement inside quieted down, and Qi Jiayu regained her calm. Outside the room, Ning Shu's expression changed. She casually pulled a servant girl aside and asked, Does your miss look for Mother Hui whenever she falls ill? Yes, it's strange. When Miss falls ill, she doesn't acknowledge anyone and only shouts that she wants to escape. Even if Madam comes personally to coax her, it's useless. Miss will only be quiet for a moment when she sees Mother Hui. Therefore, Mother Hui has been personally taking care of Miss these few days. She's basically never left her side. It's really hard on her, but Mother Hui doesn't complain at all. When did Mother Hui enter the residence? About 8 or 9 years ago. I don't remember the details. It's been quite a long time. She's very close to Miss. When she left the palace, she wasn't young anymore. Thus, she hasn't married and has been helping to educate the young ladies in each residence. She's been in our Qi residence for the longest time. She often says that she doesn't have any children, so she treats Miss as her child. Take the disappearance of Miss as an example. She blamed herself very much and went out with the servants to look for Miss every day. She's really devoted to it. On the other hand, Caiyun and Gui Jin were the ones who lost Miss, but they didn't panic at all and couldn't see her. They act as if nothing had happened all day. It's really disgraceful. Ning Shu listened carefully. A trace of deep thought flashed through her eyes. She softly replied, Oh. Chapter 195. In the room, Qi Zhaoyu made a ruckus for a long time before she finally calmed down under Mama Hui's pacification. Ning Shu did not urge her, so she waited in the courtyard. After waiting for nearly a moment, the maidservant named Yu Chu ran out with the key to the storeroom with sweat all over her forehead. She repeatedly said, Lady Ning, sorry to keep you waiting. This servant will take you to the storeroom. This way, please. That evening, after the reward was sent back to the Fu, we did not have time to tidy it up before we received the news that the fourth miss was missing. So we hurriedly piled it up here and did not have the time to take care of it. Yu Chu said as she unlocked the door. The door was pushed open with a squeak. The things inside are a bit messy. What does Lady Ning want to look for? This servant will find it for you. No need, I'm just looking around. Ning Shu stepped into the storeroom and found that the things were indeed piled up in a disorderly manner in the corner of the storeroom. At that time, in order to celebrate Qi Zhaoyu's selection of the heir consort, the concubines of the palaces had instructed the servants to choose some festive brocade boxes to hold the gifts. But these bright red and purple colors seemed inexplicably ironic and dazzling at this time. Ning Shu casually opened a few brocade boxes and noticed that there were 2 deep brocade boxes at the bottom. They were more than 3 feet long. She asked, What's inside? Oh, that's the silk and satin that the concubines have bestowed. Among them, There are 2 bolts of silk and satin bestowed by concubine Qi. Those are tributes that are rarely produced in a year. I heard that it's very rare and ordinary people have never seen it before. Ning-shu smiled and said, then I really want to see it. Please help me. Ning-shu moved the brocade boxes piled on top of the storeroom and bent down to open the brocade boxes. She found that the silk and satin inside was of excellent quality. She touched it lightly and felt that it was as smooth as water. She was about to unfold it to take a closer look when her sharp nose suddenly smelled a pungent smell. Then she heard Yu Chu gasp and shout, Lady Ning, be careful. In front of Ning-shu's eyes, less than a foot away from her hand, the silk and satin in the brocade box suddenly burst into sparks and spread rapidly. Ning-shu subconsciously withdrew her hand. Her scalp went numb, and her survival instinct made her take a few steps back. When he looked again, he saw that the brocade box had already ignited into a ball of fire. Moreover, it was spreading at an extremely fast speed in all directions, burning dozens of brocade boxes in the surroundings. In an instant, thick smoke billowed in the storehouse, and tongues of fire soared into the sky. Cough cough. The thick smoke was extremely pungent. Ning-shu immediately covered her mouth and nose. She grabbed Yu Chu, who was foolishly trying to extinguish the fire by himself. Don't worry about it. Let's go. This unforeseen event happened too quickly. Yu Chu was completely dumbfounded. It wasn't until he was dragged out of the warehouse by Ning-shu that he suddenly regained his senses and shouted, Someone come quickly. The warehouse is on fire. It's on fire. Following her shout, the nearby servants hurriedly organized to put out the fire, but the fire was too big. It was not until 2 hours later that the last spark was extinguished. When they walked into the storeroom to take a look, the inside was already a mess. All the silk and satins had been burned to black ash. Even the gold, jade, and jewelry had been burned beyond recognition. All the treasures in the storeroom were gone. Yu Chu was so scared that her legs went soft. She knelt on the ground and said with tears in her eyes, I ask Lady Ning to testify for this servant. This fire was really not set by this servant. It really has nothing to do with me. Any one of the things in the storeroom was worth more than her little life. Now that everything had been burned, her little life was over. Ning-shu pulled her up from the ground and comforted her in a low voice. Of course she knew that it was not Yu Chu who did it. She was right beside her at the time, so there was no chance for her to do anything. But where did this inexplicable fire come from? There was not a single candle in the storeroom, not a single spark. There was not even a trace of sunlight shining in, so how could it suddenly be on fire? It was simply unbelievable. And this inconceivable thing had happened right under her nose. Was it really an accident? Or did someone want to destroy something important and did not want her to see it? If it was the latter, then what was that thing? A series of questions appeared in her mind, just like the black water mixed with ashes that constantly flowed in front of her eyes, making her completely puzzled. While she was deep in thought, the maidservant Huiyu stumbled and ran over in a daze. Her voice was filled with panic as she cried, Not good. Not good. That blood claw print has appeared again. There are so many, so densely packed. It's at the 4th young Miss bedside. Chapter 196. And Huiyu swallowed hard, her whole body trembling, and said in a trembling voice, and this time it's all because of 4th Miss herself. Then she couldn't continue, as if she had just seen the most terrible thing in the world. Ning-shu immediately rushed to Qi Zhuanyu's small courtyard. Looking at the scene in front of her, she finally knew why Huiyu was so scared, because anyone who saw it would feel their scalp tingle, and then they would be horrified. This was because Qi Zhuanyu was standing on the bed that was carved with exquisite patterns. Her hands were covered in blood, and her back was facing the crowd. She was seriously drawing a mark in the shape of a wolf's claw on the snow-white wall. The paint she was using was her own boiling hot blood. On the wide wall, she had already drawn the entire wall densely. Madame Qi, who heard the news, saw this scene and took a deep breath, almost fainting, and was hurriedly supported by a servant. Qi Zhuanyu turned her head, smiled at the crowd, and then lowered her head, gently licked her own blood on her fingers, and asked flatteringly, "Look, What I drew, doesn't it look like it? Madam Chi was in tears. Oh my God. Juanyu, my son, what are you doing? You're trying to kill your mother, ah. Someone come and stop her. Quickly stop her, ah. It took more than 10 people to forcefully snatch the scissors from Chi Jianyu's hands. Then, they used soft cloth to tie her up. Only then did they stop her from committing suicide. Then, they hurriedly called for a doctor to treat her wounds. Mother Hui held Chi Juanyu, who was still screaming and struggling, with red eyes. Cai Yun was so scared that her face was pale, and she knelt and begged for mercy. Master, madam, this servant really didn't expect that Miss would steal this servant's scissors. Please spare my life. Lord Qi looked at his daughter who had completely gone crazy on the bed, frowning and sighing silently, again and again. Beside him, Madam Qi cried and said, Master, the ritual. Quickly go and ask Zhong Daozhong to arrange the ritual to summon the soul. In 5 days, no, in 3 days, he had to summon her soul back to her body. Otherwise, if this goes on, our Yu-Er will not be safe. Sobs could be heard everywhere. In the midst of the sobbing, Ning Shu's eyes glide across the faces of Mother Hui, Pagoda Jin, Huiyu, Caiyun, like a sharp knife, trying to cut through the fog of chaos and find the truth. Rain began to fall from the sky at an unknown time. It was not heavy, but it was as fine as needles. Not a single ray of light could be seen in the horizon. The entire sky was dark and gloomy, as if the entire Qi residence had been dragged into a gloomy abyss. Ning Shu stood in the corridor and raised her head to look at the sky that was shrouded in dark clouds. She thought about all the strange and complicated events that were laid out in front of her eyes. She was deep in thought when she suddenly heard the footsteps of Lian Qiao approaching from afar. Forsythia whispered excitedly, Miss, we found the silversmith who made the longevity lock. It was rare to hear good news, so Ning Shu couldn't help but be excited. Really? That's great. Where is it? Quickly take me there. There was no time to open an umbrella, so Ning Shu quickly boarded the carriage in the fine and dense rain. Jiao. Hui Mo flicked his whip and the 2 horses carried the carriage to the south of the city at the fastest speed. In the carriage, Forsythia excitedly reported, it is an old and famous silversmith shop in the south of the city. We followed Mrs. Method and checked each shop one by one. It shouldn't have been difficult to find it, but the owner of this shop went back to his hometown to visit his relatives a few days ago, so we missed it. Fortunately, we didn't give up and went to look again today, so we found it. I've asked the boss for help, and he's waiting for us in the shop right now. Ning Shu smiled and praised, Good, Forsythia, I will remember your great merit. Chapter 197. The horse galloped, splashing out transparent water. Ning Shu, who was in the carriage, arrived at the southern part of the city at the fastest speed. With Hui Mo's shout, they slowly stopped in front of a shop. After getting off the carriage, Ning Shu immediately took the longevity lock and walked in. Sure enough, the boss kept his word and waited for them in the shop. Ning Shu respectfully gave a bow and said, Hello, old mister. May I ask if this longevity lock was made by you? This was an old shop with a history of 100 years. The boss was an old man in his 50s with white hair and beard. However, he had sharp ears and eyes. He only took a glance at the longevity lock and said, Of course. Every silversmith shop has its own inheritance. The older the shop, the longer the inheritance. In order to distinguish our craftsmanship from other shops, we will make a small mark on the inconspicuous place of the objects that we make. This way, no matter how long it has been, we can recognize our own objects at a glance. For example, on this longevity lock, I engraved an extra cloud pattern compared to other shops. So, this longevity lock must be made by my family. Then, may I ask if you still remember the appearance of the person who asked you to make this longevity lock? Which family does he belong to? Then you must be joking. The old mister was amused. This thing is made by me, but it looks like an old object from 20 or 30 years ago. It has been so long, how can I remember who made it? Please don't make things difficult for an old man like me. It's getting late and the rain is getting heavier. I should close the shop. Miss, please. Ning Shu sighed and raised her head again. Her eyes were filled with tears. When she saw the old mister, she hurriedly said, "What's going on? It's just a longevity lock. How can Miss be like this?" Ning Shu lowered her head and used a handkerchief to wipe the tears from the corner of her eyes. She said, "Old mister, you may not know this, but this longevity lock is actually a relic left behind by my aunt. My aunt met with a great disaster when she was young and was abducted. Later on, she suffered countless hardships before she was able to marry into my family. After a few days of good days, she contracted a serious illness and died. She had no children, so she always took care of me as her own daughter. Before she died, she took my hand and said that her biggest regret in this life was that there was no way to find her biological parents. I was young at that time, so I didn't remember it clearly. A few days ago, my aunt came to my dream and cried to me. She said that I was young and incompetent at that time, but she didn't blame me. But now that I have grown up, I must help her. Otherwise, she will never be able to reincarnate in peace. So it's like this." The old mister was soft-hearted. He couldn't help but sigh after listening to the story. That's really a tragic thing. The old mister took the longevity lock and carefully looked at it. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly said, "I remember now. I made this lock not long after I finished my apprenticeship, so I made it very carefully. It took me a lot of effort. The person who came to make this lock seemed to be a pregnant madam. As for what she looked like, it's been 37 years, so I can't remember clearly. I only have a vague impression of her. That madam's temperament was very good. At a glance, I can tell that she came from a noble family. Sir, you are a famous craftsman in the capital. Every year, there are countless people who ask you to make jewelry for them. In the past 30 years, you have seen at least 100 noble ladies and young ladies, but you still have a vague impression of the one from 30 years ago. You must have seen something strange at that time, or heard something special that left a deep impression on you. You still can't forget it even now. I'll have to trouble Mister to think about it carefully." Ning Shu thought for a moment and said, "For example, according to what you said, that madam was obviously a noble from a noble family. Why did she only use the most common silver for the longevity lock and not the gold, jade, and jewelry that was more suitable for her status? Didn't you have any questions at that time?" "Hey, you don't say, I really did ask at that time." After Ning Shu's reminder, the old mister's memory that had been silent for more than 30 years slowly emerged in front of his eyes. "At that time, I was still a young man in my early 20s. I saw that madam's clothes and bearing were very good, but she only wanted to make a silver longevity lock. I felt very strange, so I asked the question you just mentioned. At that time, that madam was stunned for a long time and didn't say anything. Her face was very ugly. I thought, could it be that my question was too abrupt and offended a noble? I was worried about how to ask for forgiveness, but I didn't expect that madam to gently touch her belly and vaguely say, 'I don't deserve it.'" "Don't deserve it?" Yes, at that time, her voice was very soft, like she was sighing. Her face was also snow white. I have seen all kinds of people in my life, but I have never seen a second person like that madam. Her face didn't show any joy of being pregnant. Instead, it was very. The old mister thought for a long time and finally found the right word. Yes, despair. I felt that she didn't look forward to the child in her belly at all. Even when she said those words, she was full of resentment. I thought that every family has its own difficulties. Perhaps this madam encountered something bad, so I didn't ask any more questions. 3 days later, her servant came to take the lock. After that, I didn't see her again. As for which family's madam she was, she kept it a secret from beginning to end and didn't say a word. Chapter 198. Youth is like water, time is like a knife. More than 30 years of time, more than 10,000 sunrises and sets, the moon waxing and waning. This merciless cycle of the sun and moon was enough to turn a newborn baby into a middle-aged woman, a woman who loved her grandchildren. It was also enough to turn a young girl who was as beautiful as a flower bud into white hair. After such a long time, trying to find such a person in the vast sea of people in the capital, just thinking about it gave her a headache. Not to mention, her name was unknown, her appearance was unknown, and her identity was tightly concealed. Except for a few vague descriptions from the old gentleman, there was nothing left. In contrast, perhaps even ascending to heaven was easier than this. Ning Shu silently looked at the sky. My God, you really like to joke with me, ah. After solemnly thanking the old gentleman, she bid farewell. Unknowingly, the rain became heavier. The snow-white viburnum flowers on the roadside scattered in the rain. The roof of the carriage made a light patting sound, but it was unknown whether it was the raindrops or the flowers. Ning Shu was deep in thought amidst this pleasant sound. She opened the carriage curtain, reached out and caught a few drops of rain from the air, and slowly wrote on the small table in front of her. Time, more than 30 years ago. In terms of age, it was more likely that Mother Hui was the one. But after leaving the palace, she had never married, not to mention being pregnant. Moreover, she was only released from the palace 20 years ago. Before that, she had been working in the palace. From the time, she could be ruled out. In addition, according to the old gentleman, the madam's temperament was extraordinary. At first glance, one could tell that she came from a noble family. There were several servants serving her. Although Mother Hui was an etiquette instructor in the palace, in the end, she was a servant. The thin calluses on her hands were different from the old gentleman's description. Then, who could this person be? Or some old imperial concubine in the palace? No, it couldn't be. Not to mention that it was difficult for the imperial concubines to leave the palace, who served them in bed, who was pregnant. These were things that couldn't be concealed. Not to mention, the imperial family's heirs, even if they weren't valued, were still the most honorable bloodline in the Great Yu country. Why would the madam say that she wasn't worthy? Also, what was the connection between this and the literary talent who died silently? Ning Shu came up with countless speculations, but they were all rejected by her. For a moment, her head was spinning. She lifted the curtain of the carriage, intending to breathe in some fresh air and change her train of thought. Her gaze accidentally slipped and fell on an official building on the side of the road. Judging from the style of the residence, it seemed to be an official's residence, but the people who went in and out were women and children. Ning Shu's curiosity was piqued and she asked, "Where is that?" Hui Mo looked over and said, "Oh, let me see. It's written on the plaque. CIU Bureau?" Ning Shu nodded. After the carriage passed by, an idea suddenly popped up in her mind. This idea came too quickly, giving her a flash of inspiration. She hurriedly called out, "Stop the carriage." "Ah! Why did you stop?" Hui Mo doesn't know why, so he sighs. Before the carriage stops, Ning Shu has already jumped down from the carriage. Forsythia opens the umbrella and hurriedly follows her. While following her footsteps, Forsythia curiously asked, "Miss, what is CIU Bureau?" Even with an umbrella, the wind and drizzle still wet Ning Shu's clothes and her black hair, but she didn't care at all. This is a special place to adopt and abandon babies. It is full of abandoned babies. Some of them were born with disabilities, some of them were born with serious diseases, so they were casually abandoned on the side of the road and left to die. There are also some biological parents who are really poor and can't raise them, so they quietly put them at the door of the rich families around them, hoping to survive. Some of the lucky ones were adopted by rich families, while some of the unlucky ones were bitten to death by wild dogs before they even had the chance to cry, becoming food in their stomachs. When the late emperor was traveling incognito, he met a baby who was frozen to death in the snow. He was very sad, so he ordered the establishment of CIU Bureau to adopt these children. There are wet nurses to take care of them. Those who don't have children can come to adopt them. Forsythia was even more puzzled after hearing this. Why are we here? They can't be here to adopt children, right? Ning Shu stepped into the CIU Bureau, turned back and smiled. Her eyes were surprisingly bright, because we are likely to find a very important clue here. Chapter 199. Ning Shu thinks of something. She turns back and says to Huemore, who is confused, "Brother Huemore, please go back to the mansion and ask His Highness for an assistant for me." "I'm here. Why do you need to ask someone else?" Huemore snorts with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He doesn't know how to fight, examine corpses, use knockout drugs and dress up as a woman. Ning Shu smiles and gently raises her eyebrows. So, Brother Huemore is willing to check the files with me? Huemore's scalp is numb. When he thinks of the experience of looking for records with her in the Ministry of Revenue, his little heart trembles and shrinks. He is not afraid of anything else. Only when he sees a lot of words, especially a lot of words, he feels dizzy. Without saying another word, he immediately raised his horsewhip. No problem, I'll go back to the mansion and capture him. A daoist would rather die than a daoist like himself. Brother, I've let you down. Hearing Ning Shu's request, the steward of the CIU bureau refuses to nod at first. It is not until Ning Shu takes out the seal of Prince Nanping's mansion that he is reluctantly allowed to enter. Ning Shu silently curses. These days, people really treat people with disdain. I am the Duke Ning's daughter, but I can't even compare with Xiahou Qing's token. What kind of world is this? Juicy is worthy of being trained by Xiahou Qing. It doesn't take long for him to arrive. He reads the files with Ning Shu. These files have been yellow and brittle for a long time. They are covered with a thick layer of dust. As soon as she picks up a roll, Ning Shu chokes on the dust and sneezes. But now is not the time to be delicate. Gently brushing the dust off the file, Ning Shu turns to the first page. Outside the house, the rain rolled down along the eaves and formed a curtain. The warm orange light in the house reflected her silhouette on the wall beside her. In the silhouette, she lowered her head slightly and buried herself in the book in her hand, carefully reading line by line. Then she flipped to the next page, focused and serious, tireless, like a quiet painting. The brand new candle in the lampshade silently dripped tears as the book was flipped. It gradually shortened until it was extinguished. Then, it was replaced with a new one. Unknowingly, the rain quietly stopped, and the outside of the house was lit up. In the blink of an eye, it was already the second day. Forsythia had already dozed off with a file in her arms. Suddenly, she heard a voice, found it. She suddenly sobered up and saw her mistress take the file from Juicy. Her mistress's eyes were filled with complex thoughts as she murmured, "Sure enough, it's her." She closed her eyes and let out a long, silent sigh. Stepping out of the Tsiyo bureau, she felt tired and hungry. Ning Shu rubbed her aching neck. Just as she was thinking about which breakfast shop nearby had a unique taste so she could eat a full meal to recover her strength, she didn't expect that the carriage of the southern pacifying Wang Fu was already waiting at the door. Ning Shu was stunned for a moment. A jade-white hand lifted the curtain, and a slightly impatient voice came from inside. "What are you doing standing there like a fool? Come up." Ning Shu quickly got on the carriage. Looking at the person inside, she softly said, "Has your highness been waiting for a long time?" Xiahou Qing's expression was as indifferent as ever, without a trace of emotion. He lightly said, "You think too much. You just arrived." Ning Shu curled her lips, ridiculing his duplicity in her heart. From the wet ponytail and the wet marks around the carriage, it was obvious that he had been waiting here before the rain stopped. And from the time the rain stopped until now, at least 2 hours had passed. Ridiculing was ridiculing, but there was a trace of warmth in her heart. "This box, open it." Xiahou Qing casually pointed at the table. Ning Shu blinked her eyes. "What's inside? Don't you always boast that your sense of smell is sharp and you can't smell it?" Ning Shu's nose lightly sniffed, and her eyes lit up like a crescent moon. Opening it, it was as expected. The box was divided into 3 layers. The top layer had 8 kinds of snacks, the middle layer had 4 fresh dishes, and the bottom layer had a bowl of thick rice soup that emitted tempting steam. After a night of hunger, eating anything else at this time was not suitable. Only a bowl of thick and fragrant rice soup was the most appetizing, and it wouldn't make the stomach feel uncomfortable. Feeling grateful, Ning Shu said with a smile, "Thank you, Your Highness." Xiahou Qing hooked the corner of his mouth and sneered, "If I remember correctly, when I saved your life, I didn't get such a serious thank you." Ning Shu's beautiful face silently blushed, and she felt a little guilty. It seemed that it was true. After eating the snacks and the bowl of rice soup, she felt her soul return to her body, and even her thoughts became a lot clearer. Listening to Ning Shu's simple description of what she had learned in the past few days, Xiahou Qing's expression changed slightly. "So, you already have an answer in your heart about who the culprit is?" Ning Shu nodded, swallowing the last bite of the snack. It can't be considered as completely solved, but I have a basic guess about the curse of the 8 characters and how Qi Juanyu silently disappeared from the fragrant hall. But according to the clues we have, there is no legal crime against the culprit, and we still lack a conclusive evidence that can't be denied. As for this piece of evidence, it could only be obtained at a specific time. If my estimation is correct, this case can be concluded in 3 days. Why 3 days? Because Madame Qi believes that Qi Juanyu's madness is caused by her soul being separated, so she decided to perform a ritual for Qi Juanyu in 3 days to summon her scattered soul back. At that time, concubine Qi will also participate. So, if the culprit wants to make a move, that day is the best time. Chapter 200. A gentle breeze lifted a corner of the carriage curtain. A jasper flower hung down outside the carriage. It had accumulated a night's worth of rain, so it was heavy. Ning Shu raised her head to look at the flower falling silently from the receptacle. She reached out to catch it. Looking at the pure white flower in her palm, Ning Shu said softly, "However, this case involves not only the death of Wen Siren in pregnancy 6 years ago and the demon wolf case 9 years ago. There are many more unspeakable secrets. When these old matters are revealed to the public, it will inevitably set off a huge wave. And outside of that wave, I'm afraid that countless people's blood and tears will be added." Ning Shu reached out to let the pure white flower return to dust. Suddenly, she heard a series of hurried horse hooves behind her. She looked back and saw Zi Gui on the horse's back with a hurried expression. "Miss, the Qi family's ritual has been brought forward. Yesterday, Qi Zhanyu did something to harm herself. Mistress Qi did not sleep the entire night. After discussing with Lord Qi, they asked Daoist Zhong from Shenqing Monastery to perform the ritual for Qi Zhanyu today. The time will be set at noon." Ning Shu's expression turned cold. She immediately had an ominous premonition and said, "Hurry. It's now 7:15. There are still more than 2 hours before noon. If we hurry over, we might be able to stop that from happening." 2 hours ago, inside Chengqian Palace. A palace maid carefully knelt on the ground. After trimming Consort Qi's nails, she carefully dyed her red nails stroke by stroke. On the chaise lounge embroidered with golden phoenix peonies, Consort Qi supported her chin with her hand. She faced her trusted eunuch who was bowing beside her and asked, "How is the investigation of the ghost bee?" The eunuch named Jing Zhong trembled as he said, "Reporting to your highness, this servant has brought people to search the entire imperial garden but did not find any traces of the poisonous bee. The 13th princess has also sent spies to investigate, but also did not find." Consort Qi's beautiful face was slightly distorted due to anger. Then why did Xiao Zhongping say that he personally saw a poisonous bee stinging Zhanyu that day in the imperial garden? Jing Zhong was extremely terrified, and he knelt on the ground with a plop. "I beg Niang to judge clearly. That year, the beekeeper from Nanjiang was personally silenced by this servant. His heart was pierced with a knife, and he died on the spot. His youngest daughter was also strangled by this servant. After killing the 2 of them, this servant threw their corpses into the river to feed the fish to ensure their safety. This servant then stood guard by the river for 4 hours, but I didn't see any corpses floating up. Only then did I dare to leave. It's impossible for the 2 of them to come back to life." His back was almost soaked in cold sweat. He tried to clear his mind, rolled his eyes, and said, "I think that maybe when Siren revealed something to 13th princess before he died. 13th princess has been holding back for so many years in order to wait for an opportunity. She happened to wait for that day, so she took the opportunity to set up a trap and deliberately told you about the poisonous bee in public to trick you." Consort Qi suspiciously narrowed her eyes. After a while, she said, I never thought that this girl would be this cunning at such a young age. It really makes this one have a whole new level of respect for her, just like her cheap mother." She looked calm on the surface, not fighting for anything, but when this one was fighting for favor with noble Lady Mai, she took the chance to win His Majesty's favor, allowing him to favor her again. "If it wasn't for Dr. Zhong finding this clue and reporting it to me, this one would have been fooled by that cheap woman." Jing Zhong wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said in a flattering voice, "She is just a lowly maid, but she wants to compete with the sun and moon. She simply doesn't know life and death. Consort Qi, you are kind enough to leave her corpse intact. You told this servant to say that that cheap woman should be cut to pieces." Consort Qi looked down and looked at the medicine the maid had applied to her. She coldly curled her red lips. "That cheap woman is already dead and her corpse is already rotten, so it isn't a problem. As for the little cheap woman she left behind, this one has always wanted to get rid of this trouble. It's a pity that I don't know where she cultivated her good fortune, but she actually gained the backing of old Princess Yu. This one wanted to make a move, but I couldn't find a chance. If this one finds out that she was the one who did this, then don't blame this one for cutting the grass and roots." The last 4 words were incomparably sinister, making Jing Zhong's heart tremble. He only dared to lower his head with a smile, not daring to say a single word. After Consort Qi was silent for a while, she changed the topic. "Has there been any news of the Southern Peace King's manor cancelling the engagement?" "Not yet." Consort Qi nodded. "That's good. This one has worked hard for so long in order to obtain the assistance of the Southern Peace King's manor. I didn't expect that child Zui you would encounter such a strange thing. The Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and that Ning Shu are all a bunch of useless good-for-nothings. They still haven't solved the case. They are simply stupid." Jing Zhong thought for a moment, then said, "Madam Qi just sent a message saying that the soul summoning ceremony has been set up at Xianqing Temple and is only waiting for Consort Qi. When the ceremony is over, Consort Qi will summon 4th young Miss's scattered soul back. At that time, 4th young Miss will definitely return to normal. Then, the position of the Southern Peace King's heir consort will still be in Consort Qi's hands." Qi Fei stood up and let out a soft sigh. "That's the best outcome. This one has watched Zui Yu grow up since she was young, and her personality is very similar to this one. Even if it wasn't for the position of the Southern Peace King's heir consort, this one still hopes that she can be safe and sound. Since it has been set up, then follow this one." Jing Zhong signaled with his eyes, and a few palace maids immediately came over to help Consort Qi change her clothes and set up the sedan. This servant obeys. After helping Consort Qi into the sedan, a total of 16 eunuchs lifted the sedan. 6 personal palace maids followed closely behind, standing on both sides of the sedan, ready to listen to Consort Qi's orders at any time. Behind the sedan, Jing Zhong lowered his head and gently touched his face. After a moment of absent-mindedness, he immediately strode forward to serve Consort Qi. Chapter 201. Xianqing Temple. In order to let Qi Juanyu wake up earlier, Madam Qi ordered people to set up the Taoist hall at night. When the auspicious time arrived and concubine Qi arrived, Daoist Zhong would cast a spell to change her crazy daughter back to her original appearance. In the center of the Taoist hall, Daoist Zhong made a gesture with one hand and held the evil warding wooden sword in the other. He closed his eyes and prayed to the passing deities. The 9 Taoist masters around him were guarding the array and yellow talismans were flying in their hands. In order to prevent Qi Juanyu's madness from acting up and disrupting the process of casting the spell, Lord Qi had to order people to feed her drugs. At this time, Qi Juanyu was lying quietly on the altar covered with cinnabar runes, waiting for the Taoist masters to cast the spell to summon her soul. In the sky, Daoist Zhong pinched his fingers and calculated. He suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "The stars on Taishang are ever-changing, exorcising evil spirits, protecting one's life and protecting one's body. Wisdom is clear, mind is peaceful, the 3 souls are eternal, the soul is without loss, the gods bless, the soul returns to its place, the auspicious time has arrived. Please sprinkle the holy water, Concubine Qi." Concubine Qi stepped forward and took the golden bottle from Daoist Zhong. Then, she turned and walked to Qi Juanyu and sprinkled the holy water on her body. Madam Qi held Lord Qi's sleeve tightly and looked here. Her eyes were nervous and expectant. She was afraid that if this ritual was ineffective, their only daughter would have no hope in this life. Mother Hui and the others were also nervous. The whole place was silent. Only the sound of the teachers chanting and the sound of the holy water sprinkling from the bottle could be heard. Under countless expectant eyes, Qi Juanyu, who had been sleeping, suddenly opened her eyes. She called out softly to concubine Qi, who was sprinkling the holy water on her. "Aunt." Tears fell from Madame Qi's eyes. She stepped forward and said, "Juanyu, my daughter, are you awake?" Qi Juanyu slowly got up and turned her head stiffly to look at her. Suddenly, her face showed an extremely painful expression. "Mother, my body is so hot." Then, in front of everyone, Qi Juanyu, who was splashed with holy water, suddenly emitted a cluster of sparks and screamed loudly, "Arrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr but they saw it burn into a ball of flame in an instant. This unforeseen event happened too quickly. Qi Fei was so shocked that she fell to the ground, completely losing her bearing. Jing Zhong and the others hurriedly helped her up and hid to the side. Mother Hui shouted in shock, "Miss." He wanted to rush over and slap away the flames around Qi Jueyu, but the flames burned more fiercely. In an instant, they converged into a raging fire and swallowed Qi Jueyu whole. Amidst the raging fire, Qi Juanyu screamed and fell from the ritual platform to the ground. Her shrill scream was like coming to hell. Madame Qi cried and wanted to rush over to save her daughter, but she was held back by Lord Qi. Lord Qi's eyes were bloodshot. He turned his head and shouted, "Sand and stone, water, quick!" But it was too slow. In the end, it was too slow. When Ning Shu arrived, she saw this scene. Crazy and crazy, dying an unnatural death. In the end, these 8 characters were confirmed by Qi Juanyu. When buckets of water completely extinguished the fire on her body, she had already been burned into black charcoal. Lord Qi walked over shakily and tried to wake up his only precious daughter, but when he stretched out his fingers, he could no longer feel Qi Jianyu's breathing. Lord Qi raised his hand and looked blankly at the sky. Then, he looked at his sister who was frightened out of her wits not far away. Finally, he punched the ground heavily and tears fell at the same time. Madame Qi had already fainted from crying. Qi Fei was in a trance and almost went crazy. She could only silently say, "How could this be? How could this be? Have you heard? Have you heard?" Consort Qi burned her own niece to death with her own hand. Chapter 202. For a moment, the streets and alleys of the capital were all talking about the same strange incident. What? Could it be that she's also crazy? Why would she burn her own niece to death? Who knows? Strange things happen every year, especially this year. Perhaps it's because the Qi family's 4th miss has already gone mad and is no longer of any use. Fortunately, they killed her to prevent her from ruining the Qi family's reputation. Even if that's the case, they should have quietly dealt with her. How could they do this in public in front of so many people? Even the honorable imperial concubine Qi wouldn't dare to commit such a heinous crime. Moreover, the Taoist temple's holy water actually burned a living person to death. In my opinion, there's only one explanation for such a bizarre incident: heaven's punishment. The Qi family must have done something so evil that even heaven couldn't stand it anymore and sent down heaven's punishment as a punishment. The curses of the 8 characters that had been spreading throughout the capital and the curses of those who had died unnatural deaths had all been placed on her body. This is the best proof. Oh, if that's really the case, then how evil must it be to make heaven so angry? Haha, I'm afraid that only the Qi family knows in their hearts. Do you still remember? 9 years ago, the 7-year-old Qi family's 4th miss killed a wolf demon on the street and dragged the wolf demon's corpse for 3 whole streets. To do such a thing at such a young age, how could she not have done many evil things over the years? As for Consort Qi, which concubine who has climbed to such a position in the imperial harem is easy to deal with? No matter what, Consort Qi burned the Qi family's 4th miss to death in front of so many people. This is an indisputable fact. Let's just wait and watch the show. For ordinary people, this strange incident was just another topic to talk about after a meal. The officials of the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Justice all stood at the scene of the crime, withstanding His Majesty's anger and almost pulling out all the hair on their foreheads. From beginning to end, This case was so strange that it made people scratch their heads. They did not expect that the strangest thing was yet to come. Looking at the pitch-black corpse of the fourth miss of the Qi family, the officials only felt that their official careers would be ruined today. Your Majesty. Concubine Qi raised her head and 2 streams of tears fell. The heavens had given her an extremely beautiful appearance. Even though she was almost 40 years old, she was still as gorgeous as a blooming flower, dazzling and ostentatious. At this moment, this dazzling flower was leaning against the palace maid's chest, trembling all over. Her face was deathly pale, as if she had been ruthlessly ravaged by a torrential storm. She actually showed a rare fragile and pitiful side. When she saw the emperor's bright yellow dragon robe appear in front of her eyes, she immediately grabbed onto it tightly like a drowning person seeing a piece of driftwood. She broke down and wailed, "It wasn't me who harmed you, it wasn't. Your Majesty, please believe me. Please believe me. It really wasn't me who harmed her." She had a dazed expression as if she just witnessed her own niece being burned alive before her eyes, and it terrified her to the point her mind was in chaos. The emperor looked at this woman who had accompanied him for nearly 20 years and had almost melted most of his life into her life. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pity in his heart. The emperor patted her hand comfortingly and ordered the palace maids to immediately bring her into a quiet room to take good care of her. "Who can explain clearly to me what exactly is going on?" The emperor slowly turned around and looked around at all the officials present. His deliberately lowered voice was enough to show how angry he was at this moment. "It's best if no one talks to me about cursing the heavens or ghosts or gods. Otherwise, I'll execute their entire family right now." No one present dared to make a sound. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice was helplessly pushed forward to bear the emperor's rage. "Just now, we found a half-burned Daoist robe in the stove of Enchanting Temple. We suspect that someone disguised themselves as a Daoist priest to infiltrate Enchanting Temple and took the opportunity to tamper with the ritual. We beg your Majesty to give us some time. We will definitely investigate this case." Before he finished speaking, the emperor had already laughed. Every inch of his trembling flesh moved with his angry laughter. "Ha, give you time? Could it be that I haven't given you enough time? If I give you more time, I'm afraid that the people's saliva would have already drowned the entire palace." The emperor's gaze swept around. "Where is the daughter of the Ning family?" In the crowd, Ning Shu sighed in her heart. She had no choice but to step forward and bow. "This official's daughter, Ning Shu, greets your Majesty." The emperor put on a fake smile and said, "I remember that imperial concubine Qi has already given this case to you. In the previous case, your mouth was very sharp. How come you're not saying anything now? Have you become mute?" Ning Shu lowered her head and didn't reply. The emperor flew into a rage. "From the matter of the curse to today's case, my patience has already run out. Since none of you can find anything, then I'll take care of it. Since today's matter happened in Enchanting Temple, it can't be separated from Enchanting Temple. There are nearly 100 people in the temple, but they couldn't guard against a murderer. All of them are guilty of negligence. In addition, the 37 people from the Imperial Astronomer's office who took over the curse, the 8 eunuchs by Imperial concubine Qi's side, and the 6 maidservants who were outside the palace on the night of the incident in Wenfang Hall. Arrest all of them and interrogate them. I don't believe that I can't find a murderer." With the emperor's order, hundreds of guards immediately filed in. For a moment, the entire Enchanting Temple had countless people kowtowing and begging for mercy. They cried and cried. It was like a prison. The scene that she didn't want to see the most finally happened in front of her eyes. Ning Shu had no other choice. She could only step forward and say in a clear voice, "Reporting to your Majesty, this official's daughter already has an idea of who the murderer is. I ask your Majesty to allow this official's daughter to go forward and examine the body of 4th young Miss Qi to confirm my thoughts." Chapter 203. The emperor's eyes drooped as he tried to suppress the anger in his heart. Then, he coldly said, "I'll give you 3 incense sticks of time. If you can't give me a satisfactory answer after 3 incense sticks of time, I'll punish you as well." Ning Shu bowed and said, "This little girl obeys." After temporarily dealing with the emperor, Ning-Shu turned around and walked towards the crying Qi family. Madame Qi had already fainted from crying. Qi Daren was nearly 50 years old and had lost a son and a daughter in succession. At this moment, he was extremely sad and his eyes were filled with tears. His chest was filled with anger and he wanted to vent it on everyone present. He wanted them all to be buried with his precious daughter. However, he blankly looked around and found that other than his own sister, the concubine Qi, who had always been the pride of the Qi family but had used a cup of holy water to burn his youngest daughter to death, there was no one else he could blame. This huge anger and confusion made his blood boil. His throat was hoarse and he couldn't say a single word. He vaguely remembered that not long ago, that delicate and tender little baby was sent out of the delivery room. That soft little bundle wrapped in swaddling clothes was sent to him. He had several sons before and had always strictly adhered to the Qi family's ancestral teachings. This caused them to respect and fear him, but they didn't get close to him. Only this little girl, who had been crying when the midwife brought her to him, smiled as soon as she saw him. From then on, he held her in the palm of his hand, afraid she would fall. He held her in his mouth, afraid she would melt. He couldn't wait to send the best things in the world to her. Therefore, even though he clearly knew that her temperament was a bit too spoiled and domineering, he still couldn't bear to discipline her. He only thought that with him and the Qi family's plaque, nothing big would happen. But who knew that in the end, his baby would still die? She would die in the hands of his own family. Qi Daren's eyes darkened and his legs staggered. He almost fell down and was supported by the servants. In his dry throat, the only sound he could make was the sound of weeping. Because her death was too tragic, in order to preserve the last trace of dignity, Qi Daren ordered Mother Hui to quickly find a white cloth to cover her. When Ning-Shu pushed her way through the crowd to examine the corpse, Lord Qi said in a hoarse voice, "Do you really have a conjecture in your heart, or are you just beating around the bush? If it's the latter, don't touch my daughter." Right now, the Qi family was in a dilemma. His daughter, Yun Ying, had died a tragic death before she was married. If her body was dissected in public, he wouldn't even be able to keep his face after death. How would he be able to see his daughter in the Yellow Springs in the future? It would be fine if the culprit was found, but if there was no result in the end, then the blame would be pushed onto concubine Qi. This would be a fatal blow to the Qi family that had already been deeply cut twice. "Lord Qi, don't worry. My daughter wouldn't dare to commit the crime of deceiving the monarch. In a moment, this humble girl will ask the surrounding people to avoid arousing suspicion, leaving only a few female servants as assistants to roughly examine the surface of fourth young Miss body. We will definitely not disgrace fourth young Miss." Lord Qi opened his mouth silently, but in the end, he turned his face away. "Then, go ahead and investigate. If you find out who harmed my Yu'er and my Qi family in the end, I will definitely crush that person. Corpse. 10,000. Duan." Ning-Shu gave a few simple instructions, and a few maidservants immediately went to find a few wide cloths to surround the corpse, separating it from the view of others. Then, she led Forsythia in. It had to be said that Qi Juanyu had really died a tragic death. As soon as the white cloth was lifted, Forsythia subconsciously turned her face away. After being burned by the raging fire, the clothes on her body had almost been burned to ashes, leaving only a few tattered pieces stuck to the corpse. Her skin and flesh had long been burned and stuck together into a piece of charcoal, emitting a suffocating smell. Looking at the horrifying scene in front of her, Ning-Shu let out a soft sigh in her heart. Not long ago, in Weiyang Palace, Qi Juanyu's appearance when she found out that she had been selected seemed to still be in front of Ning-Shu. At that time, a crimson blush immediately dyed her cheeks, her fingers entangled, and she was so excited that she almost shed tears. She used the most expectant eyes in the world to look at her sweetheart walking towards her from behind the screen. She did not have her usual arrogance, nor did she have her usual arrogance and cruelty. What was left was only a young and infatuated girl, wholeheartedly infatuated with her sweetheart. In just a few short days, she had become like this. Was this really God's punishment? Perhaps in a sense, it was the cycle of the heavens, and retribution was not good. Back then, she had planted the poisonous seed with her own hands, and in the end, it bore the evil fruit, and it was on her own body. Chapter 204. Ning Shu didn't have time to sigh. She put on the pig foam gloves that Huemore gave her and quickly checked her body. She knelt down on one knee and sniffed her body carefully. When she smelled another complex and pungent smell hidden in the burnt smell of the corpse, she frowned slightly. Then she carefully pinched a piece of the burnt clothes on her body and crushed it in her palm. She pondered for a moment and then ordered for Scythia to give her a knife. She cut a small piece of charcoal from Chi Jueyu's body and put it in the copper plate. Then, she held the murder weapon in her hand, which was the golden cup with the holy water. She carefully looked at it, rubbed the water droplets on it, and sniffed the smell. Finally, she observed every corner and every detail of the Taoist hall. After doing all this, the third incense stick was almost burned to the end. When Ning Shu stood up, she was already sweating. She didn't have time to wipe her sweat. She turned around and looked at one of the maidservants of the Qi family who was huddling and crying in the corner. She said softly, "Mother Hui, you have completed the perfect revenge. Please tell us the truth." Hearing this, everyone present was stunned. They were silent for a moment, and then there was an uproar. Even Lord Qi, who had been angry all this time, was stunned. He opened his eyes in disbelief. How could it be her? This woman was born in the palace and was a famous etiquette instructor in the capital. She was invited by him to teach Chi Jueyu many years ago. She had always done her best to take care of Chi Jueyu. Even Madame Qi, who was Chi Jueyu's biological mother, was not as thoughtful as her. Not to mention how dedicated she was in the past. After Chi Jueyu's accident, she blamed herself every day and followed the servants to look for Chi Jueyu in the capital. After Chi Jueyu went crazy, the other servants were afraid of being bitten by Chi Jueyu, so they all avoided her. Only she stayed by her side and took care of her day and night. Until just now, she was still kneeling beside Chi Jueyu's body and crying. She beat her chest in grief and said that she wanted to follow Chi Jueyu. When the officials of the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court came in, who didn't sigh at her loyalty? How could it be her? However, this Lady Ning's clear eyes fell on her as she asked her a question. Everyone followed her line of sight and saw that beside Chi Juanyu's corpse, Mother Hui was kneeling with the other servants. She slowly raised her head and looked at Ning Shu with tears and confusion. She said slowly, "Lady Ning, what do you mean by that? How come? I don't understand at all." Ning Shu shook her head gently. "You've been leading this series of cases from the beginning to the end, haven't you?" Before Mother Hui could speak, the maidservant beside her had already questioned, "How is this possible?" Just now, when Miss was on fire, Mother Hui was the first to rush forward to put out the fire regardless of the danger. Now, the blisters on her hands are still there. How can you say that Mother Hui is Mrs. Murderer? Someone beside her immediately agreed and complained for her, "That's right, that's right." Moreover, since the masters rushed to the training hall this morning, Mother Hui hasn't left Miss's side and has been serving Miss. She hasn't touched any holy water or golden zun. How could it be her? Lady Ning, you can't just find someone to take the blame for the case. No matter how cheap our servants' lives are, they're still lives. Even Lord Qi, after bowing his head and thinking slowly, said hoarsely, "When we arrived at Shenqing Temple this morning, in order to prevent Yue from falling ill, I ordered Mother Hui to serve Yue closely and not leave her side. Logically speaking, she shouldn't have had the chance to do anything in this case." Ning Shu's words were firm. "No, she did something. It's just that she's not the only one." "What do you mean?" "Because since that mysterious and treacherous blood signature, or even earlier than the wolf demon's revenge, besides her, there was a group of people who conspired with her to do all this." Chapter 205. A group of people. His Majesty looked at Mother Hui, who was kneeling on the ground like a frightened quail. It was hard for him to imagine that such a huge mystery would be solved by such a woman. Was it not a joke? Ning Shu met His Majesty's suspicious gaze, neither servile nor overbearing. She straightened her back like a lotus flower, showing her certainty and confidence. "Your Majesty, The inside story of this case is extremely complicated. Every link is intertwined, and it is difficult to pick out one by one to explain clearly. Your Majesty, please allow me to start from a few days ago when the imperial astronomer divined the cursed lot and report to you one by one. The emperor reluctantly squeezed out some patience and said, "Okay, tell me everything from the beginning to the end." After Ning Shu bowed in greeting, she raised her head. The golden crow above her head had been covered by a dark cloud at some point in time. The surroundings darkened, but her eyes were abnormally bright, like two balls of black mercury immersed in water. She could easily see through the chaotic fog. As everyone knows, a few days ago at the peace banquet in Weiyang Palace, hosted by the Empress, concubine Qi, and several old concubines, the Crown Prince of Nanping Prince drew lots to choose his concubine. In the end, the fourth young lady of Qi drew the letter written by the Crown Prince of Xiaohou and was chosen as the Crown Princess. At that banquet, the 13th princess got into an argument with the fourth young lady of Qi because she did not draw the letter. Then, there was the incident of her falling into the water by the imperial garden. After that, the fourth young lady of Qi mysteriously disappeared without a trace in the fragrant hall. It was not until a few days later that her trace was found under a bridge where beggars gathered. After Ning Shu summarized the matter as briefly as possible, she began to peel off the hidden bud of the lotus petal one by one and showed it to everyone. Actually, what everyone doesn't know is that the ceremony of drawing lots to choose the consort was not real from the beginning to the end. Because at that time, the box that contained the 24 pieces of paper was all empty. The only piece of paper written by His Highness the Crown Prince had long been put aside in order to fish out the fish that was hidden in the muddy water. As soon as the first petal of the lotus petal was peeled, it caused a heated discussion. "Ah, so that's it. In that case, the fourth miss of the Qi family is not the rightful princess consort." There were also people who couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh. However, because Lord Qi was also present, they didn't dare to say it out loud. They only muttered in their hearts, on the day of the selection, the Qi family was so high profile. They sent cart after cart of rewards to her residence. When the Qi family received the good news, the sound of firecrackers immediately rang out. Who would have thought that from beginning to end, it was just an illusion? Now, the mirror is broken and the flower is ruined. This is really absurd. Sigh. The emperor thought of something and suddenly asked, "Why were you there that day?" Ning Shu choked for a moment, then awkwardly explained, "His Highness the Crown Prince received the imperial edict and entered the palace. When he learned about the curse, he was worried all night. Perhaps it was because my daughter accidentally solved the case last time, which made His Highness think highly of my daughter, so he privately ordered my daughter to assist from the side." She tried her best to explain, but the other officials present all revealed some kind of obscure and mysterious look. Ning Shu was silent. Ever since that absurd banquet at the Chasing Cloud and Chasing Moon restaurant, the two enthusiastic officials from the Ministry of Justice had gone back and exaggerated, spreading the unspeakable things between her and Xiao Yuni, Tan Siwei, and Xiaohou Qing like wildfire. In such a large capital, there were more than 10 yamens from 6 provinces and 6 ministries. Every day, they would meet in the morning court. Since they had nothing to do, they had long spread the unspeakable things to 4, 5, 6, or 7. During the previous 2 investigations with the Supreme Court, she had more than once heard the officials quietly gossiping about her, describing how Ning Shu's 9-tailed fox divine technique had reached a new level. Now, there was another piece of evidence of her seducing Xiaohou Qing. Oh heavens, what the hell is this? She didn't have time to mourn for her damaged reputation. She coughed a few times and quickly pulled the topic back to the main topic. In short, His Highness' method was very effective. As expected, the other party made a move. The 24 noble ladies present each drew a blank letter. Logically speaking, no one was chosen, but something incredible happened. After the letter in 4th Miss Qi's hand was opened, there was actually writing on it. After the incident, we immediately investigated and analyzed that the letter in 4th Miss Qi's hand must have been swapped. At that time, there were 5 people besides her who touched her letter. They were the personal nanny who helped her with the fire paint, the 13th princess who fought with her for the letter, the 2 palace servants who came on behalf of concubine Shu to stop her, and old consort Yu who persuaded the 13th princess. At that time, our attention was attracted to the 13th princess who had just quarreled with her, but we ignored the personal nanny who was standing beside her and serving her, whom she regarded as her confidant, Mother Hui. She was the one who had the most opportunity to do something. People were the easiest to be blinded by the light. After the incident, they subconsciously put Mother Hui and Qi Juanyu in the same camp. They suspected Xiao Zhongping, Shen Xing, and concubine Su. They even suspected that 4th Miss Qi might be in love with His Highness, so she did it on purpose. However, they didn't take Mother Hui, who was respectful and almost invisible, seriously. Chapter 206. Mother Hui looked at Ning Shu blankly and said, "It's my duty to serve Miss. You can't put the blame on me just because I was there at the time." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Wang Han, thought for a moment and agreed, "There is no conclusive evidence and no witnesses. At best, we can say that she has the suspicion and possibility of committing the crime, but we can't directly convict her." Ning Shu declined to comment and continued, "Then came the incident where the 13th princess and the 4th miss of the Qi family fell into the supreme liquid pool together. When the 4th miss of the Qi family was rescued from the pool, everyone suddenly found that her collar had been stuffed with that crazy, and unnatural death curse. Similarly, because 13th princess and 4th Miss Qi were in close contact and fell into the water together, everyone looked at 13th princess suspiciously. Is there any eunuch who participated in the rescue at that time? At that time, the incident was very big. Many eunuchs in the palace were ordered by the Empress to participate in the rescue." Hearing Ning Shu's question, a eunuch beside His Majesty quickly raised his hand. "I was there at that time." "Eunuch, please recall carefully. When you rescued 4th Miss Qi from the supreme liquid pool, did you find the curse in her collar?" The eunuch bowed his head and carefully recalled for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, "I don't think so." After Ning Shu nodded her head in thanks, she asked the eunuch to go back. "Yes, after I asked several palace maids and eunuchs who participated in the rescue, the answer I received was exactly the same, no. Your Majesty can go back to the palace and ask all the palace maids who participated in the rescue. A pair of eyes may be negligent, but so many people didn't notice it. It wasn't until 4th Miss Qi was rescued ashore and the maids wrapped her with a cloak that Grand Tutor Qian's second daughter suddenly found the curse on 4th Miss Qi's collar. Please think about it. If the 13th princess secretly put the token into her collar before she fell into the water, she would struggle when she fell into the water. How could the 13th princess guarantee that the token would not be shaken into the water? Secondly, why didn't the 13th princess find the token when so many eunuchs and palace maids fished her out and touched her closely? Tan Siwei, who was standing behind the Chancellor of the Supreme Court, thought for a moment and said, "So, it's very likely that someone secretly put the signature into 4th Miss collar when the servants were in a hurry to cover her with cloaks. At that time, everyone was in a panic and surrounded 4th Miss, so no one would have noticed the extra pair of hands." "Yes." Ning Shu nodded and smiled. "At that time, the person who was closest to 4th Miss was also you, Mother Hui." Mother Hui was frightened and flustered. Every wrinkle on her face was written with grievance. She opened her mouth and was about to defend herself when she was interrupted by Ning Shu. "I know. You want to say that it's just a matter of duty, so let's skip this part and continue. After that, 4th Miss Qi was frightened when she fell into the water. Consort Qi arranged for her to rest in the fragrance hall, which was closest to the imperial garden. That night, the disappearance of 4th Miss Qi shocked all of us. At that time, there were more than 100 guards guarding the perimeter of the fragrance hall. 4th Miss Qi was resting alone in her bedroom. 6 servants, including Mother Hui, were guarding outside the hall. 4th Miss Qi's bedroom was on the 2nd floor and there were guards guarding the staircase. Logically speaking, even if she had wings, she would not be able to escape the eyes of the many guards. After that, Consort Qi ordered people to search the entire fragrance hall, but they did not find any suspicious secret passages or hidden compartments. Judging from the situation at that time, no one would be able to steal a living person from there, but it happened. So, at that time, I was also confused and at a loss. Coupled with the blood print of the wolf's paw on the dress, everyone could not help but associate it with the mischief of a demon. However, are there really demons and ghosts in this world that can stir up trouble? I don't believe it. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Wang, revealed a puzzled expression and asked, "Then how do you explain this matter? The night before, old Princess Consort, you went to the Fragrance Hall to visit 4th Miss Chi at midnight, but she disappeared at midnight. During this time, even if Mother Hui had the ability to secretly hide 4th Miss Chi, there was no way to transport her out of the palace." Ning Shu nodded. Every day, the key to the imperial harem would be released at midnight and the palace gates would be opened at midnight the next day. During this time, no one would be able to enter or leave the harem. This is something that everyone knows. Wang Han sneered, then what else did Lady Ning say? Could it be that this woman has the ability to hide someone for a few hours and then teleport them out of the palace? Moreover, after the incident, these servants were personally escorted out of the palace by the guards. It's possible to hide a few handkerchiefs on them, but to hide a living person? Stop joking. Ning Shu smiled, her eyes clear and bright. She gently tilted her head and said, "But who said that 4th Miss Chi must have disappeared after midnight?" Chapter 207. Ning Shu calmly raised her guess. After 4th young Miss was chosen as the heir's wife, the concubines and grand concubines of the various palaces bestowed 4th young Miss with many treasures and silks as congratulatory gifts. They almost piled up into a small mountain. When the sun was setting in the west, I visited 4th young Miss as a small eunuch by the heir's side. I personally heard 4th young Miss instruct Hui Memar to lead people to pack up a portion of the treasures and transport them back to the residence. After that, 4th young Miss went into the hall to rest with Hui Memar's support and never came out again. Perhaps no one noticed that among the treasures, there was a reward from Consort Chi, 2 bolts of silk and satin from Zhongchuan province that were placed in a crimson brocade box. That brocade box was more than 3 feet long and 2 feet deep. It was enough to wrap up a soft and slender young girl and place her inside. Then, without anyone noticing, it would be placed in a carriage with the other items and transported back to the Chi residence. This is simply, Ning Shu's guess was too outrageous. After everyone heard it, they couldn't say anything. They could only use their stunned expressions to express their shock. Then what should we do with the 2 extra bolts of silk and satin? Those are 2 bolts of silk and satin that weigh several dozen catties. You can cut them up and deal with them separately. Once you break them up, the troublesome matter will be easily solved. Ning Shu replied briskly, "You can either put the small pieces of silk into each brocade box or tie them to your body. Either way, there are ways to do it." At the time, everyone thought that she had disappeared in the palace, and they only thought in that direction. In their panic and worry, who would have thought that the 4th young lady, whom they were so desperately searching for, was hidden in the pile of gifts that had been shipped back to the Fu? I guessed that you had already arranged for people to receive the 4th young Miss in the Chi residence. When the brocade box that hid 4th young Miss was transported back to the Chi residence, it was secretly transported out using the kitchen's swill cart or night fragrance buckets. Mother Hui, when you were repeatedly searched and questioned, nothing could be found. After you were leisurely released from the palace, everything had already been settled. What you needed to do was to put those pieces of silk back into the brocade box and place them at the bottom of the pile of rewards. After saying that, Ning Shu turned around and looked straight into Mrs. Hui's eyes. I think that's why you were so anxious to burn it when I went to the storeroom on a whim. It's because there's a big secret hidden in it that can expose you immediately. Am I right, Mother Hui? Mother Hui was dazed for a moment, as if she couldn't understand what Ning Shu was talking about. She pursed her lips and slammed her forehead on the ground. This old servant doesn't know why Lady Ning would have such an idea. Now that the brocade box has been burned to ashes, this old servant really can't explain myself. However, I still want to speak up for myself. Your Majesty, this old servant is innocent. What Lady Ning said, this old servant didn't do a single thing. Tan Siwei listened attentively, following Ning Shu's train of thought. However, a new question quickly arose. According to what Lady Ning said, Qi Juiyu was hidden in the brocade box and sent out of the palace before 5:30 p.m. Then, after that, her bedroom was empty. How could no one have discovered it? Ning Shu analyzed clearly. There are two possibilities for accomplishing this. The first possibility is that the other 5 maidservants who entered the palace with her conspired together, so no one would expose it. They even made up a lie together when someone came to visit. Then, one of them would pretend to be 4th young miss and lie on the bed. In any case, 4th young miss was already asleep. As long as she turned her back, no one would be insensible enough to wake her up, let alone verify whether she was the real one. Xiong Jin, Hui Yu, and the others kneeling beside Mother Hui immediately cried out for injustice. The emperor waved his hand in annoyance and ordered people to temporarily gag their mouths. Then what about the second possibility? And the second possibility? Ning Shu raised her head and looked in the direction of the emperor. In an extremely soft voice, she slowly said, "Then it can only be old Princess Yu, how dare you?" The emperor immediately revealed an angry expression. Chapter 208. When everyone present heard Ning Shu mention old Princess Consort Yu, they had a feeling that His Majesty would be furious. As expected, His Majesty's face was tense, as if he would order the palace servants to punish Ning Shu for her audacity at any moment. This was because the late old Prince Yu was His Majesty's most trusted elder brother. Not only did he risk his life to save His Majesty when Zhao Wanzhong was plotting rebellion in Jingzhou, he also made great contributions to His Majesty when His Majesty ascended the throne 25 years ago, helping His Majesty secure the throne. His Majesty had always remembered this kindness in his heart. Now that old Prince Yu had passed away, old Princess Consort Yu was the only one left in Prince Yu's household. His Majesty was very moved and treated old Princess Consort Yu even more favorably as compensation. Even the imperial princess was given to her to raise to relieve boredom. How could he allow a little Ning Shu to offend her? Not to mention putting her in the position of a suspect. This Lady Ning's guts were as big as ever. Did she not know how to write the word death? It really made people admire her. Ning Shu fearlessly met His Majesty's slightly narrowed eyes and bowed, "May Your Majesty please calm down. My daughter's guesses are not baseless and have a reason." Before His Majesty could punish her, she quickly explained the reasons for her suspicions. Generally speaking, unless it's something urgent, most people wouldn't visit others at such a late time like the 9-hour period. Especially when 4th Miss fell into the water in the afternoon. In order to express her concern, old Princess Consort Yu should visit earlier to express her concern. However, she chose to do so at such a time. This is one of the reasons. Secondly, after old Princess Consort Yu visited, the servant said that 4th Miss had already rested and it was inconvenient for her to meet. However, old Princess Consort Yu still insisted on visiting. After pushing the door open to take a look, she retreated and said that since 4th Miss had already fallen asleep, she would not disturb her for the time being and would come back tomorrow. Doesn't such an action seem abrupt? Did she really not believe the servant's words, or did she come just to help Mother Hui clear her suspicions and at the same time, to obscure the true time of 4th Miss's disappearance? Clap, clap, clap. After Ning Shu finished speaking, a few claps suddenly sounded from afar. Accompanying the claps were a few intermittent coughs. Ning Shu looked towards the source of the sound and found that it was none other than old Princess Consort Yu whom she had just mentioned. The emperor asked, "Imperial sister-in-law, why are you here?" Old Princess Consort Yu sighed softly. "This old one was burning incense in the nearby Miaojing Hall when I suddenly heard the servants say that 4th Miss of the Qi family had been burned to death by Imperial Consort Qi in Xianqing Temple. How could this old one not be worried when such a big thing happened? I thought that Your Majesty must be very anxious right now, so I came to take a look. Perhaps there is something this old one can help with." After answering the emperor, old Princess Consort Yu turned her gaze and looked at Qi Juanyu's charred body to express her deep regret. Then, she said to Lord Qi, "My condolences." Finally, her gaze slowly landed on Ning Shu. After sizing her up slightly, she revealed an expression of admiration. "You are the Ning family's girl, right? This old one remembers that when you were born, The Duke's mansion held a 100-day celebration. This old one even hugged you once. At that time, I saw that your large eyes were very lively, and I told Hersheen that when you grew up, you would definitely be intelligent and charming, as clear as jade. I didn't expect it to be true. Her deduction was methodical and indeed worthy of praise. I just didn't expect that at this old one's age, with half of my body buried in the earth, I would actually have the opportunity to be treated as a suspect. This can be considered as experiencing something new before my death. It is indeed interesting. The Emperor had always respected old Princess Consort Yu. At this time, when he heard her say this, he felt that Ning Shu's guess was simply absurd. He coldly said, "Daughter of the Ning family, how can old Princess Consort Yu be slandered by you? Quickly kneel down and beg for forgiveness." Just as the Emperor was about to punish her, he didn't expect that the one to smooth things over was old Princess Consort Yu. "Your Majesty, there is no need to be angry." Ning Yatu only said that there was such a possibility and didn't say that it was definitely this old one's doing. Why don't we listen to this child first? This old one is also very curious about the truth behind this mysterious case. Old Princess Yu smiled amiably and looked at Ning Shu with a very tolerant gaze. "Regarding your two questions, this old one can answer them all. First, this old one didn't visit the Qi family's fourth young miss in time because Chongping Yatu had also fallen into the water that day and was frightened and suspected. There was an endless stream of people who came to visit the Qi family's fourth young miss, but no one went to see Chongping. This old one had taught her for 6 years after all and had a deeper relationship with her. I couldn't bear to see her like this and went to accompany her first. It wasn't until she fell asleep that I had the time to visit the Qi family's fourth young miss. I ask for your Majesty and official Qi's understanding on this point. As for the second point, the Qi family's fourth young miss falling into the water was more or less related to Chongping. This old one was worried that if this misunderstanding wasn't explained clearly in time, it would really become a misunderstanding. Thus, in a moment of desperation, this old one didn't care too much. Moreover, this old one thought that the Qi family's fourth young miss was unhappy and refused to see this old one. Thus, this old one insisted on entering the hall. After entering, this old one realized that the servants weren't lying to this old one and that the Qi family's fourth young miss had already fallen asleep. Thus, this old one retreated. At that time, this old one did indeed see the shape of the quilt bulge and had the same long hair as the Qi family's fourth young miss, so this old one didn't think too much about it. I don't know if Ning Yatu is willing to believe this explanation. Chapter 209. Everything had a motive. Old Princess Yu colluded with the servants of the Qi family to kill Qi Juanyu, who had nothing to do with her. Even a novel wouldn't write such a ridiculous story. After hearing old Princess Yu's explanation, the people who weren't convinced by Ning Shu's second conjecture felt that it was even more ridiculous. Wang Han and the others looked at His Majesty's expression and immediately said, "Old Princess Yu has always been devoted to Buddhism and has no enmity with the fourth young mistress of the Qi family. Why would she participate in this case? It must be the work of these 6 servants. This official agrees. This official agrees." 7 or 8 officials stepped out to vouch for old Princess Yu. The smile on His Majesty's face finally faded a little. Caiu, Xiong Jin, and the others, who were kneeling in the corner with their mouths gagged, had no color on their faces. They shook their heads with all their might and cried. Ning Shu glanced at them lightly, a trace of pity appearing in her heart. Was it Hui Memar and the 5 servant girls who conspired together, or was it old Princess Consort Yu who was covering up for her? My daughter has been pacing back and forth between these 2 possibilities, unable to make a decision. Especially after hearing that the fourth young mistress had more or less scolded and punished these servants. It's hard to guarantee that these servants won't hold a grudge and wait for an opportunity to take revenge. Following Ning Shu's words, Xiong Jin and the others trembled. Every bone in their body seemed to have been broken and they collapsed to the ground. Their teary eyes were filled with despair. Wang Han snorted and pointed at Mother Hui. He said loudly, "Then this case is clear. Send these servants to prison and torture them. I believe that we will be able to find out the truth soon." Especially this stubborn Mother Hui. She must be the mastermind. Everyone's gaze followed Wang Han's finger and looked at Mother Hui, who had been kneeling on the ground and kowtowing. Unknowingly, the dark clouds above them had gathered and the sky was getting darker. She slowly raised her head and the ravines that had been eroded by time seemed even darker under the gloomy sky. Lady Ning, up until now, everything is just your conjecture. There isn't a single piece of evidence. Lady Ning, are you going to use your glib tongue to frame this old servant? Even if I die, I won't be convinced. Everyone looked at each other. That's right. If there was no conclusive evidence, no matter how wonderful the deduction was, it would still be a deduction. It wouldn't count, and it wouldn't be able to convince the people of the world. On the contrary, the commoners became suspicious and casually pulled a few scapegoats to cover up the truth of concubine Chi's murder. This old woman looked thin and weak, but her words were unexpectedly sharp. Tan Siwei frowned and looked at Ning Shu worriedly. Ning Shu said, "Actually, there is evidence. It's just that fourth young miss, Lord Chi, and Madam Chi all trust you too much and gave the evidence the perfect cover." Mother Hui sneered, "I'd like to hear the details. For example, after fourth miss went missing, Madam Chi gave out porridge for several days in a row, praying that the gods in the past would be moved to appear and send fourth miss back. The one who first thought of that idea wasn't Madam Chi, but you, Mother Hui, right? That's why you still couldn't find her and sent someone to deliver the porridge to the bridge, only to find out that fourth miss had been thrown into a pile of beggars." Mother Hui sneered and shook her head with a firm expression. "This old servant just suddenly remembered a story that I've heard before. A rich family lost a child and washed their face with tears all day long. They kowtowed to the Bodhisattva and begged for forgiveness. The Bodhisattva pitied them and told them in their dreams that if they were truly sincere, then they should do 100 good deeds. If they persevered and truly moved the heavens, then the heavens would fulfill their wishes. When fourth miss went missing, Madam almost cried herself to death. Everyone in the residence went out and couldn't find her. This old servant had no choice but to tell Madam this story. In the end, the one who made the decision was Madam, not this old servant. Lady Ning, how can you suspect this old servant just because this old servant told a story?" Chapter 210. Mother Hui is indeed worthy of being an etiquette instructor from the palace. You're so eloquent. Ning Shu nodded and sighed in admiration. Her lips curved slightly. Ever since fourth young miss was found, I noticed a very strange thing. As long as fourth young miss was awake, she would shout that she wanted to escape. She also kept begging not to skin me. Logically speaking, the Chi residence is her home. With her parents and brothers in the residence, it should be the place that gives her the greatest sense of security in the world. Mother Hui, please explain to me why she would have such a reaction. Mother Hui lowered her eyes and sighed. Perhaps during the time she was missing, Miss suffered a great shock and couldn't recognize anyone. She couldn't even tell that she had returned home. Ning Shu pressed on. Then how do you explain why it was useless for Lord Chi and Mistress Chi to coax her? She would only calm down for a moment when she saw you, Mother Hui. Perhaps it's because this old servant has taken care of Miss for so many years, so Miss trusts this old servant a lot. Ning Shu smiled. She can't recognize her parents, but she trusts you a lot. Such a deep master-servant relationship is really touching. Mother Hui's eyelids suddenly twitched and her expression changed visibly. However, she still gritted her teeth and refused to admit defeat so easily. Then, according to Lady Ning, what is the reason? The truth is that it's not trust, but fear. It's so great that when she smells your scent and hears your voice, she will feel deep fear and despair. That fear causes her to instinctively want to escape as soon as she leaves your sight. It also causes her to immediately curl up and not dare to move when you arrive. She's as obedient as a sparrow in a cage. Ning Shu quickly asked, Lord Chi, perhaps you still have a deep memory of what happened yesterday? Lord Chi was still in a state of extreme shock and nodded stiffly. Yesterday, Yu was agitated and stole a servant's scissors and everything that had happened in the past few days was like a knife that cut into this father's heart. This knife was followed by another knife. Until now, he was in so much pain that his entire body was numb. He took a deep breath and finally found some strength to continue his story. After that, she drew wolf paw prints on the wall with her own blood. After that, more than a dozen servants worked together to stop her. At the end of his speech, he raised his hand to cover his face and sobbed silently. Then, Lord Chi must still remember that after Fourth Miss painted the entire wall yesterday, she turned around and said something to us. She said, "Look, I drew it. Don't they look alike?" Lord Chi nodded. Then, does Lord Chi still remember the subtle movement she made when she said those words? When she said that, she looked ingratiatingly in a certain direction. Following Ning Shu's reminder, the incident that happened yesterday once again returned to Lord Chi's mind, causing his mind to constantly replay every minute detail that he had seen at that time. He didn't find it the first time, so he carefully recalled it the second time and the third time. At that time, she seemed to have looked in the direction of my wife. No. She wasn't looking at my wife, but Mother Hui, who was standing diagonally behind my wife. Lord Chi suddenly turned around, his pair of red eyes opened wide as he stared fixedly at Mother Hui. It was only now that he was finally willing to admit that the loyal servant he had personally chosen for his daughter was actually the main culprit behind his precious daughter's entire tragedy. Chapter 211. Facing such a gaze, old Mistress Hui subconsciously touched something in her sleeves and said sarcastically, "At that time, fourth young mistress had already lost her mind. This is something that everyone knows." She inadvertently glanced in my direction. This was just a coincidence. How can you conclude that it was me who did it with just a glance? I've seen other officials looking for conclusive evidence to solve a case. Do you only rely on a few words from me or a random glance from fourth young mistress? That Lady Ning is really a strange person. She was still so stubborn and tried to quibble. Ning Shu gently shook her head and sighed. "Mother Hui, you keep asking me if I have conclusive evidence. I can tell you that I do. And that thing should be on you right now, that old red fortune bag." As if God had suddenly stopped everything, Mother Hui's face suddenly froze. The hand that was subconsciously half hidden in her sleeves instantly pressed down on something in her sleeves, as if she was pressing down on her own life. "I have to admit that everything you did before was too flawless. You acted so vividly that I couldn't put the word murderer on you. So I couldn't understand the process of the crime until I accidentally found the fortune bag you dropped." Ning Shu looked at her deeply. "At that time, your reaction was very fast. You said that the fortune bag belonged to fourth young mistress when she was young. In order to pray for her to recover her consciousness, you took it out and wore it. So I didn't think too much about it. It was only after the incident that I realized that you were lying. That wasn't fourth young mistress's fortune bag at all. The Chi family was a big family, and as the apple of the Chi family's eye, the fourth young mistress should have received the best since she was young. Even a random orchid planted in the fourth young mistress courtyard was a very precious species, not to mention the things she used personally. And the fortune bag you dropped was made of the most common red cotton cloth. You wanted to cover up your lie in a moment of desperation, but you didn't know that it was your only flaw. It was because of this small flaw that I locked onto you as a suspect." Mother Hui was at a loss for words. She opened her mouth, wanting to defend herself, but she couldn't say anything for a long time. She knew that she was at the end of her tether. The case was settled. She loosened her sleeves, and the red cotton bag that she had been hiding in her sleeves finally slipped out and landed in front of everyone. Great anger rushed to Lord Chi's head, making him dizzy. He rushed to Mother Hui with bloodshot eyes. If it wasn't for the Imperial Guard stopping him, Lord Chi would have already pulled out a sword and stabbed Mother Hui. "Why? Mother Hui, how did the Chi family treat you unfairly? You want to take revenge on us like this? Why? Ever since I invited you to the estate to teach you 8 years ago, I've always given you the best treatment, the greatest trust, and the greatest respect in the estate. You has even treated you like a wet nurse. Why? Why? Exactly why?" A father's roar, filled with heart-wrenching grief, infected everyone present. For a moment, the entire place was silent, and not a single sound could be heard. Under the cover of the dark clouds and Lord Chi's blood-red eyes, Mother Hui lowered her head and picked up the lucky bag that had fallen to the ground. She didn't care that it was old and faded. Instead, she carefully brushed away every single speck of dust on it and put it to her chest. She said in an extremely soft voice, as if she was coaxing a baby to sleep, "Yes, why? I also want to know." After she finished speaking, she suddenly raised her head and met Lord Chi's gaze with the same hatred. Every word was filled with resentment and hatred. "I also want to know why you and your wife gave birth to such a demonic daughter who killed the most important person in my life." Chapter 212. Both of them were over 50 years old. Their once flat faces were now filled with wrinkles, and their black hair was gradually dyed with silver. They were like two beasts that were gradually losing their strength and walking toward old age. However, at this moment, these two old beasts, because of their strong hatred, faced each other again. It was as if they were ready to start a fight at any moment to vent their anger. The direction of the matter was too shocking. For a moment, all the bystanders were confused. Even the emperor paused, his eyes full of confusion. When I discovered the abnormality of the fortune bag, I was also very confused. As everyone knows, Hui Mama has been single ever since she left the palace. She has never married, much less had a child. Hui Mama's family is also very small. When she left the palace, she was already 30 years old. Her only sister had married far away, and she could not see her children. Logically speaking, there was no need for a fortune bag. So, why did she have such a fortune bag that belonged to a young child? She also carried it with her and treasured it very much. Ning Shu's story was very interesting. Even Feng Zheng, the minister of the Supreme Court, who had always been ill and did not interrupt anything, couldn't help but mutter in a low voice, "Yes, this is too strange." Noticing that His Majesty's eyes had drifted towards him, the old man immediately coughed a few times, leaned against the pillar next to him uncomfortably, and clutched his chest as he cried out in pain. At first, my daughter had the same idea as official Feng. The acting was truly spectacular. Ning Shu looked in his direction, smiled lightly, and then said seriously, "Before solving this mystery, Your Majesty, please listen to my daughter talk about another case. A few days ago, a man named Feng San died in Yinma Alley in the north of the city. To the side, the entire Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court had been stolen by this little girl." Wang Han, who was very unhappy in his heart, crossed his arms in front of him and huffed coldly, "The case hasn't been solved yet. Why are you talking about those unrelated people? The emperor is very busy every day. He doesn't want to waste time with you." Tan Siwei tried to smooth things over by saying, "Lord Wang, please calm down. This humble subject was fortunate enough to be involved in Feng San's death. There is a great connection between this humble subject and the disappearance of the fourth miss. This humble subject discovered it when I accompanied Lady Ning to investigate the hiding place of the Qi family's fourth young miss. By the time we arrived at the door and pushed it open, we discovered that the person was already dead in the courtyard of her home. Not a single inch of her skin was left, and wolf pelts were sewn onto her body. And his skin." Tan Siwei still felt nauseous when he thought of the scene where Ning Shu and Huemo cut open Feng San's stomach and fished out a pile of things. It was hard to describe the situation at that time. I believe Lady Ning will give Your Majesty a satisfactory explanation later. Ning Shu nodded at Tan Siwei to express her gratitude. She then continued, "The reason why my daughter mentioned Feng San is because it was this person who caused all the tragedies that followed. He was also the main culprit behind the thousands of families in the capital. On the surface, he was a fur trader and horse dealer, but in reality, he was a trafficker who specialized in kidnapping and selling young children. Lord Tan found a book in his home, which recorded in detail the evil deeds he had committed during those years. Starting from the 7th day of the 9th lunar month in the 15th year of natural selection, he successively abducted hundreds of young children and sold them out of the city to other places. It wasn't until the 3rd month of the 16th year of natural selection that His Majesty strengthened the guards at the city gates, which made him unable to continue his business. An official who had worked in the Ministry of Revenue immediately said, This humble subject has some recollection of that time. During those 2 years, there were many reports of missing children in the capital, so this humble subject reported it to His Majesty. His Majesty was wise enough to notice that something was amiss. He made a prompt decision to double the number of guards at the city gates and set a rule that Yong Chengwei would patrol the city 4 times a day. Only then did the number of people reporting the missing children gradually decrease. Unfortunately, the missing children still couldn't be found. Because he thought of another tragic method, the words that represented the most evil recorded in the book came back to Ning Shu again, causing her to close her eyes. Make, liken. When she heard those 2 words, Mrs. Hui's heart violently twitched, as if the most painful piece of flesh in her heart had been forcibly gouged out by someone. She was in so much pain that she wanted to die. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.